The clinking of fine crystal brought the bustling room to a sudden halt. Bishop Marcus stood up, raising his glass of vintage champagne high into the air. His booming voice, the exact same charismatic tone that commanded thousands of devoted followers every Sunday morning, filled the dining room. "Let us toast to my beautiful Chloe and her brilliant husband, Brad." He beamed, looking at them with a fierce pride he had never once directed at me. Brad just closed a massive portfolio deal securing this family legacy for generations to come. This, my friends, is what true success looks like. The table immediately erupted in enthusiastic applause. My mother Vivian clapped the loudest, her manicured hands fluttering with delight as she gazed adoringly at her son-in-law. I offered a polite, silent nod, wanting only to get through the evening without incident. But my father was not finished with his performance. He turned his gaze toward the end of the table where I sat, his smile instantly dropping into a familiar sneer of absolute disdain. "Maya," he ordered sharply, pointing a heavy finger toward the empty serving plates. "Get up and clear the table right now. The catering staff is busy preparing the dessert service." I froze, the heavy silver fork slipping slightly in my grip. I looked over at the swinging kitchen doors, where 3 hired caterers were clearly standing idle, waiting for their cue. It was a deliberate power play, an unnecessary public humiliation designed to remind me of my lowly place in his kingdom. When I did not immediately leap from my chair, his voice grew louder and much more aggressive. "Did you hear me speaking to you? Your sister is better than you in every conceivable way, and you are never enough. Chloe secured a legacy and a real man. You just play with spreadsheets in some cramped office trying to pretend you matter. Learn to serve your betters, Maya." Chloe giggled softly, covering her mouth with a manicured hand, while Brad smirked, leaning back in his chair like a conquering king. My mother quickly chimed in, telling me to stop being so difficult and just do what my father instructed. For 32 years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had endured the endless comparisons, the mocking comments about my plain clothes, the constant reminders that I was the scapegoat who chose a boring, invisible path. I had even quietly bailed them out of massive bankruptcy 4 years ago through a blind trust, purchasing this exact estate so my mother would not have to face the utter humiliation of a public foreclosure. I did it out of a misplaced sense of loyalty. But sitting there listening to the man whose lavish lifestyle was entirely funded by my silent charity, something fundamental inside my chest finally snapped. I did not cry or shout or throw my glass. I simply picked up my linen napkin, wiped my mouth, and stood up to my full height. I looked my father directly in the eye, my voice perfectly steady and dangerously calm. "Then choose her," I said. I picked up my purse from the back of the chair. Under the table, completely out of their sight, I opened my secure banking application. It took exactly 3 swift taps to revoke the blind trust freeze, the corporate credit cards, and permanently cut off the financial life support they had been blindly leeching off of for years. My mother gasped, clutching her pearl necklace, deeply offended by my tone. "How dare you speak to your father that way?" she scolded, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "Sit down right now before you ruin Brad's celebration dinner." I completely ignored her and pushed my heavy wooden chair in. Brad, eager to play the wealthy savior, waved his hand dismissively at me. "Let her go, Vivian," he said with a patronizing chuckle. "I will handle the wine bill tonight anyway. Waiter, bring the $2,000 check directly to me." The waiter approached timidly, holding a leather folder, and took Brad's sleek black card. I walked slowly toward the grand foyer, my heels clicking loudly against the imported marble floors that my money had paid for. I reached the heavy mahogany front doors just as the waiter returned to the dining room. His voice carried perfectly through the tense, silent air of the estate. "Sir, I am so incredibly sorry, but this card has been declined." The sudden eruption of total confusion and panicked voices behind me was the sweetest sound I had ever heard in my entire life. I opened the door, stepped out into the cool evening air, and did not look back. My phone did not stop vibrating the entire drive back to my condo. 47 frantic text messages flooded my screen before I even pulled into my designated parking spot. Most were from my mother demanding I turn the car around immediately and beg my father for forgiveness. Several were from Chloe calling me a petty, jealous spinster who intentionally ruined her husband's celebratory dinner out of spite. I did not read a single one of them completely. I simply tossed the device onto my passenger seat and let it buzz itself to death. For 32 years, they had dictated my narrative and controlled my emotions. Tonight, I officially rewrote the script. The next morning, I traded my plain black Sunday dress for a razor-sharp tailored charcoal suit. My family loved to mock my boring desk job, completely unaware that the financial spreadsheets I played with dictated the survival of Fortune 500 companies. Walking into the glass-enclosed penthouse office of Vanguard Holdings, my anonymous private equity firm felt like stepping into my true skin. My executive assistant, David, met me at the private elevator with a smart tablet and a fresh espresso. He listed off the morning acquisitions, including a hostile takeover of a commercial real estate portfolio worth $80 million. I signed the digital authorization without breaking my stride. I was not the timid middle child sitting at the far end of Marcus and Vivian long dining table. I was the chief executive officer of an empire they did not even know existed. I spent the next 2 weeks ruthlessly restructuring corporate assets while completely ignoring the mounting chaos happening in my father house. The declined credit card at dinner was just the first domino falling. I knew Brad would try to spin it as a banking error to save face. I also knew it was only a matter of time before the real panic set in. That panic arrived on a Tuesday evening in the form of heavy, frantic pounding on my front door. I lived in an unassuming 2-bedroom condo on the edge of the city limits. It was deliberately modest, serving as the ultimate stealth wealth camouflage. I opened the door to find my mother standing in the hallway vibrating with absolute rage. She wore a wide-brimmed church hat and a designer silk wrap, looking completely out of place against my minimalist hallway decor. Before I could even say hello, she pushed aggressively past me and stormed straight into my living room. "What kind of sick game are you playing, Maya?" she demanded, dropping her heavy luxury handbag onto my kitchen island. "Your father is absolutely furious. Brad has been dealing with a massive temporary bank glitch for 2 entire weeks, and you have the audacity to ignore your sister when she calls for help. We know you have some savings stashed away from that little office job of yours. I need you to write a check right now to cover their living expenses until Brad gets his corporate accounts unlocked." I leaned back against the granite counter holding my freshly brewed mug of coffee. I watched her frantic movements, noting the slight tremor of panic in her manicured hands. "It is not a bank glitch, Mom," I said, my voice completely level and cold. "Brad is broke. He has been broke for years. I am not writing a check for him or anyone else in that massive house." My mother's face twisted into a harsh mask of pure indignation. "How dare you lie about a successful white man just because you cannot get a decent husband of your own?" she yelled, stepping closer. "Brad is a prominent Wall Street executive. He manages millions of dollars. Do you have any idea how much money his firm brings into our church? The deacons respect him. Your father relies heavily on his financial guidance to keep the congregation growing and the donations flowing. You are embarrassing our family standing in the entire church community because you are too bitter and plain to help your own flesh and blood." "He is a miserable fraud," I countered, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "And if Dad is taking financial advice from him, the church is already in serious trouble. I suggest you go home right now and ask your golden son-in-law why his elite corporate cards are suddenly declining everywhere he goes." The truth hit her hard, but her fierce maternal denial fought back instantly. She lunged forward without warning and slapped the ceramic mug right out of my hand. The coffee shattered violently against the hardwood floor, sending dark, scalding liquid splashing across my bare ankles and the baseboards. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I just looked down at the broken pieces and then slowly brought my gaze back up to meet my mother's wide, furious eyes. "You listen to me, you ungrateful child," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger just inches from my face. You will transfer $50,000 to Chloe account by tomorrow morning. Your father commands it. Our family reputation is on the line because of this so-called banking error, and you are going to fix it immediately. You owe us for putting up with your miserable attitude your whole life. I calmly grabbed a paper towel and wiped a drop of coffee from my wrist. I stood up to my full height, forcing her to look up at me. I owe you absolutely nothing, I stated, my tone dropping to a deadly whisper. I spent my entire life being your designated scapegoat. I sat silently while you praised a con artist and demeaned my very existence. But that ends today. You can tell Marcus and Chloe and that fake Wall Street genius they are officially cut off from my funds. The Bank of Maya is permanently closed. Now get out of my house before I have building security escort you to the street. My mother gasped, clutching her chest dramatically, as if I had physically struck her. She opened her mouth to scream another insult, but the cold, absolute authority radiating from my eyes stopped her dead in her tracks. She snatched her designer bag and fled down the hall, slamming my front door so hard the framed pictures on the walls shook. I spent the next hour quietly cleaning up the spilled coffee, completely unbothered by her dramatic exit. I knew the storm was only just beginning to gather strength. 4 days passed in total and absolute silence. Then my phone buzzed violently against my nightstand. I opened my eyes and glanced at the glowing digital clock. It was exactly 5 in the morning. The caller ID flashed Chloe's name brightly in the dark room. I let it ring 3 times before slowly swiping the screen to answer. Maya, please answer. Her voice cracked instantly, coming through the speaker in a hyperventilating panic. You have to help me right now. Something terrible happened tonight. Men are here at the house. They are towing Brad Porsche and taking my car directly from the driveway. They have clipboards and legal court orders, and they are asking for you. The frantic pitch of my sister's voice through the phone speaker was absolute music to my ears. I grabbed my keys and pulled my sleek, unbranded sedan into the gated neighborhood just as the morning sun began to peek over the meticulously manicured tree lines. The scene unfolding in my father's massive circular driveway was absolute cinematic perfection. One tow truck had already hoisted Brad's prized silver Porsche high into the air. The other was currently securing thick steel chains around the oversized wheels of Chloe's pristine white Range Rover. Brad was standing right in the middle of the expansive driveway, wearing a silk bathrobe over his expensive pajamas, looking completely unhinged. His usual polished Wall Street persona had entirely vanished, replaced by the frantic, erratic energy of a cornered rat. He waved a leather-bound wallet aggressively at the burly repo men, shouting at the top of his lungs, "You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. I am a senior vice president at a major metropolitan financial firm. My father-in-law is Bishop Marcus. He owns this entire block and half the real estate in this zip code. If you touch that bumper, I will have you sued into total bankruptcy by noon. I will have your jobs. I will have your entire company shut down permanently. I demand to speak to your regional manager right now." The repo men ignored his temper tantrum entirely, moving with the practiced, quiet efficiency of professionals who dealt with fake rich people every single day. One of them calmly adjusted a heavy tension strap over the Range Rover rear tire, while Brad continued his red-faced tirade. Bishop Marcus himself stood on the grand front porch, clutching his velvet robe tightly around his chest, looking utterly bewildered and terrified. He kept stretching his neck, looking up and down the quiet street, praying no wealthy congregation members or church deacons were driving past on their morning commutes. His carefully crafted reputation as a blessed and highly favored leader was currently dangling from a tow truck hook. I stepped out of my sedan and closed the door with a loud, firm thud that echoed across the quiet suburban neighborhood. Chloe whipped her head around, her perfectly blown-out hair now a tangled, messy halo around her tear-stained face. She ran down the grand porch steps barefoot and marched straight toward me, pointing a sharp, accusatory finger. "You did this?" she screamed, her voice cracking with pure, venomous rage. "You knew this was a simple banking error and you deliberately refused to help us. You let Mom come to your apartment and beg for a temporary loan, and you sat there like a cold-blooded sociopath. You could have stopped this public humiliation, Maya." You have money hoarded away in that sad little lonely life of yours, but you are too bitter and vindictive to share it with your own flesh and blood. I folded my arms across my tailored charcoal suit jacket, completely unfazed by her hysterical tantrum. I am not responsible for your husband failing to pay his basic bills, Chloe. Brad cut in, storming over to join his furious wife. His face was glistening with cold, nervous sweat. I told you it was a temporary margin call from my prime brokers, he barked, trying to puff his chest out to physically intimidate me. The liquid funds are clearing on Monday morning without fail. But because you are too cheap to offer a simple weekend bridge loan, my personal property is being unlawfully seized. You are going to call your bank right now and authorize an emergency wire transfer to get these trucks out of my driveway. Chloe crossed her arms, nodding vigorously in agreement with her husband. You are just extremely jealous, Maya, she sneered, stepping aggressively closer to my face. You have always been terribly jealous of me since we were little girls. You hate that I married a highly successful white man who treats me like a literal queen. You hate that I have the ultimate fairy tale life, the elite country club membership, the untouchable status in the megachurch. You are a miserable, lonely spinster who plays with boring spreadsheets all day, and you want to drag me down to your pathetic, mundane level. Dad was entirely right about you. You will never be good enough to fit into our luxurious world, so you are actively trying to destroy it. I did not raise my voice. I did not blink or step back. I simply looked directly at the woman who had spent 32 years treating me like a subservient peasant and smiled. It was a deep, genuine, knowing smile that made her take a sudden, uncertain step backward. I am not trying to destroy your world, Chloe, I said calmly, keeping my tone perfectly even. I am just repossessing all the unpaid props. Before Chloe could formulate a coherent response, the lead repo man, a massive guy named Hank with a thick gray beard and a heavy canvas jacket, hopped down heavily from the flatbed truck. He wiped his greasy hands on a shop rag and walked right past a sputtering, furious Brad. Hank did not even look at my father, who was still cowering silently on the shadowed porch. He walked straight up to me and extended a metal clipboard. "Morning, Boss," Hank said, his deep, gravelly voice carrying clearly over the loud hum of the diesel engines. "Vehicles are fully secured for your limited liability company, just like you ordered last night. We got the Porsche and the Range Rover locked down tight and ready for transport to the holding lot." He handed me a thick black pen. "Do we seize the luxury speedboat next, or wait for the new legal warrants to clear the court system?" Brad and Chloe stared at me in absolute paralyzed horror. Their perfect, opulent facade shattered instantly. My father gripped the porch railing, completely speechless. I clicked the heavy pen, ready to sign. I dragged the heavy black pen across the bottom of the repo manifest, leaving my signature with a swift, decisive flourish. I handed the clipboard back to Hank. "Seize the boat," I instructed him, my voice ringing crystal clear in the cool morning air. Hank gave a sharp nod, signaled his crew, and within seconds, the heavy diesel engines roared to life. My family stood frozen as the massive flatbed trucks rolled down the circular driveway, taking Chloe pristine white Range Rover and Brad Prize silver Porsche with them. The deafening silence that followed the departing trucks was almost suffocating. Chloe's mouth was open in a silent scream of absolute disbelief. Brad stared at the empty driveway pavement as if staring hard enough would magically make his luxury vehicles reappear. Then my mother realized the sheer magnitude of their social exposure. The wealthy neighbors in the adjacent multi-million-dollar estates were definitely watching through their custom drapery. Vivian could never handle a public humiliation of this magnitude, so she resorted to her oldest, most reliable tactic, a highly theatrical medical crisis. She gasped loudly, clutching the collar of her silk wrap tightly against her throat. "Oh Lord, my heart," she wailed, her knees buckling perfectly on cue. "Marcus, catch me. I cannot breathe. The stress of this wicked girl is killing me." My father snapped out of his paralyzed stupor and lunged forward, catching his wife before she hit the expensive imported stone of the porch. He yelled for Brad to help him lift her up. Chloe began screaming hysterically, pulling at her hair, claiming that my vindictive actions had literally given our mother a massive heart attack. I stood there watching the flawless performance, knowing Vivian heart was as perfectly cold and highly functional as it had always been. "We need an ambulance," my father bellowed, his booming pastor voice echoing off the neighboring mansions. I checked my watch, completely unmoved by the dramatic flailing happening on the porch. "Calling an ambulance will draw a massive crowd, and flashing sirens," I stated calmly. "Put her in the back of my sedan right now. I will drive you to the emergency room myself." The car ride was an absolute nightmare of theatrical groaning and aggressive prayers from my father, who commanded healing over his wife while shooting me venomous glares through the rearview mirror. I pulled up to the emergency room entrance of the city's most exclusive private hospital. It was the only medical facility prestigious enough for Bishop Marcus and his elite family. The moment we stepped through the sliding glass doors, my father immediately shifted into his mega-church leader persona, expecting the waters to part for him. He marched straight up to the triage desk, demanding the head of cardiology and a private VIP suite for his wife. The hospital administrator, a stern-looking woman with sharp glasses, peered over her computer monitor, completely unbothered by his booming voice and grand demands. "Sir, I need your insurance card and a photo identification before we can bypass triage," she said, tapping her keyboard with professional indifference. My father scoffed, deeply offended by the standard protocol. He reached into his leather wallet and dramatically slapped his premium platinum tier health insurance card onto the counter. "I am Bishop Marcus, and my wife requires immediate elite care. Run the policy." The administrator swiped the card. She frowned, tapping her keyboard again with a bit more force. She swiped it a second time, her brow furrowing in confusion. I stood a few feet back, watching the arrogant color slowly drain from the administrator's face as she looked back up at my father. "Bishop Marcus," she began, her voice dropping to a discreet, apologetic whisper. "I am incredibly sorry, but the system is automatically rejecting this card. Your premium family health policy was officially canceled exactly 4 days ago due to severe non-payment. The account has a massive outstanding deficit and has been flagged by the billing department." My father physically recoiled as if the woman had slapped him across the face. Chloe, who had been dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, froze completely. Brad shifted his weight nervously, looking everywhere except at the hospital desk. "That is an absolute lie," my father boomed, his voice echoing through the quiet emergency room waiting area, causing nurses to turn their heads. "My church administration handles those premiums automatically. Run it again immediately." The administrator shook her head firmly, refusing to back down. "Sir, I have run it twice and contacted the provider portal directly. The policy is entirely void. If you want us to admit your wife into a private VIP observation suite right now, we require an upfront out-of-pocket deposit of exactly $10,000. My father stood there, his chest heaving, his supreme authority crumbling in front of the hospital staff. He quickly spun around and locked his desperate, furious eyes on me. "Maya," he barked, snapping his fingers in my direction with ultimate disrespect. "Give this woman your credit card right now. Put the $10,000 deposit on your account while Brad sorts out this ridiculous administrative error with his prime brokers." I looked at his outstretched hand, then slowly shifted my gaze to Brad, who was sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent hospital lights. I crossed my arms and offered a tight, humorless smile. "I am not paying a single dime," I replied, my voice echoing clearly for the entire waiting room to hear. "You just spent Sunday dinner praising Brad for closing a massive Wall Street portfolio. You said he secured the family legacy for generations to come. So let the brilliant financial whiz kid use his massive corporate bonuses to pay the hospital deposit. I am just a plain dropout who plays with spreadsheets, remember? My money is not good enough for your VIP needs." My father's face contorted with a rage so intense a prominent vein throbbed visibly against his forehead. He opened his mouth to unleash a tirade of biblical proportions, but Vivian suddenly groaned loudly from the nearby wheelchair, demanding his immediate attention. As my father rushed over to pacify her and Chloe frantically dialed the church accounting office, Brad saw his window of opportunity. He grabbed my elbow aggressively and yanked me hard around the corner into a deserted hospital corridor, away from the security cameras and the prying eyes of the nursing staff. He pinned me against the cold, sterile wall, leaning in so close I could smell the stale coffee and pure rising panic radiating off his breath. "Listen to me, you bitter, arrogant little girl," he hissed, his voice shaking with pure venom. "You think you are so incredibly smart, cutting off the trust fund and seizing those luxury cars. You are going to march back out there and pay that deposit immediately. If you do not, I swear to you, I will have your father publicly excommunicate you from the entire megachurch community before sunset. We will completely destroy your professional reputation. We will tell every prominent family in Atlanta that you are a sociopathic estranged daughter who tried to leave her own mother to die in a hospital lobby. You will be an absolute social pariah. You will have absolutely nothing, Maya." I did not struggle against his aggressive grip. I did not raise my voice or call out for hospital security. I just looked at the desperate, sweating man trying to intimidate me and felt a profound sense of absolute power. I smoothly pushed his arm away from my shoulder, smoothing out the lapel of my tailored suit jacket with deliberate calm. I leaned in close to his ear, closing the physical distance between us until my voice was a deadly quiet whisper against his skin. "Go ahead, Brad," I murmured softly, my eyes locked onto his terrified pupils. "Have my father excommunicate me. Destroy my name in the church. But before you do that, you might want to explain to the good bishop exactly why you were unceremoniously fired from your prestigious investment firm 2 whole years ago for massive insider trading." I stepped back and watched the remaining blood completely drain from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost haunting the hospital hallway. Brad stumbled back a half step, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The arrogant sneer that usually plastered his features melted into pure, unfiltered terror. I watched his eyes dart nervously down the sterile hospital corridor, checking to see if my father or sister had magically teleported around the corner to hear my revelation. When he realized we were still completely alone, his survival instincts finally kicked in. He smoothed his hands down the front of his wrinkled dress shirt, forcing a sickeningly sweet smile onto his pale face. He abandoned the aggressive physical intimidation, instantly pivoting to the slick, manipulative charm he used to con his way into my family. "Maya, let us be reasonable," he whispered, his tone suddenly dropping an octave to sound intimate and conspiratorial. "You have some outdated information that you are misinterpreting. My departure from the firm was a mutual separation based on differing strategic visions. I am currently transitioning to an independent wealth management structure. You are a smart girl, Maya. You work in an office all day. You understand how corporate restructuring works. Do not let silly industry rumors tear our family apart during a medical crisis. We need to handle this like adults. Meet me for lunch tomorrow. Just the two of us and Chloe. We can put all this ugliness behind us and figure out a real solution for your parents." I stared at his extended hand, ignoring it completely. "I will meet you," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "but only because I want to see exactly how deep your absolute delusions go." The next afternoon, I walked into the private dining room of an upscale country club Brad had somehow managed to keep a membership at. He and Chloe were already seated. Chloe wore oversized, dark sunglasses indoors, clutching a mimosa like a lifeline. Her perfect golden child facade was showing serious cracks. Her designer dress looked slightly wrinkled, and her usual perfectly manicured posture was slumped with exhaustion. Brad stood up, pulling out a chair for me with an exaggerated theatrical flourish. I sat down, placing my leather tote bag on the table between us. I did not bother looking at the menu. Brad leaned forward, interlacing his fingers, resting his elbows heavily on the pristine white tablecloth. He dropped the nice guy act immediately, deciding to go straight for the jugular. "Let us cut the nonsense, Maya." He started, his voice low and demanding. "I am in a temporary liquidity crunch. I have a massive margin call hitting my accounts by Friday, and the creditors are not the kind of people who accept late payments or partial installments. I need exactly $500,000 in liquid cash by tomorrow morning." I raised a single eyebrow, staring at him in sheer disbelief. "You brought me here to extort me?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. I am giving you an opportunity to save this family, he corrected smoothly, his eyes narrowing into cold, calculating slits. We know you have equity in that cheap little condo you live in. You are going to take out an emergency mortgage line of credit and wire the funds directly to my holding account. If you do this, I will gladly forget the disrespectful stunt you pulled with the tow trucks at the estate. If you refuse, Maya, I promise you will never see your nieces or nephews ever again. I will make sure Chloe completely erases you from their lives. You will not get holiday photos. You will not get birthday invites. You will be entirely dead to the only children who will ever carry our family bloodline, since you clearly cannot secure a man of your own. I turned my calm gaze to my sister, expecting at least a flicker of hesitation or maternal protective instinct. Instead, Chloe violently slammed her champagne flute onto the table, spilling yellow liquid over the rim. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of pure resentment. "Do not look at me like that, Maya," she hissed, pointing a shaking manicured finger across the table. "You are going to do exactly what my husband says. You are going to write that check and fix this immediately." I leaned back in my chair, studying the absolute sheer audacity of the woman sitting across from me. "You want me to mortgage my home to pay off your husband's gambling debts to dangerous creditors?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational. "He is not gambling!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing loudly off the private dining room walls. "He is investing." "But you would not understand that, because you are just a glorified secretary working a mundane job." "You are so unbelievably predictable, Maya. You are just a bitter, jealous woman trying to tear down a successful white man because you are deeply intimidated by his intellect and his pedigree. Brad comes from real money. He operates on a level of high finance you could not possibly comprehend. You are deliberately trying to sabotage my perfect marriage because you want me to be as miserable and alone as you are. You hate that I am living a beautiful interracial fairy tale while you commute to a sad little cubicle. Just give us the money and apologize for your disgusting behavior right now." The sheer level of absolute, unadulterated delusion radiating from her was almost impressive. She genuinely believed her own manufactured reality. She believed her husband was a financial genius. She believed I was a jealous spinster. She believed she held all the cards in this twisted negotiation. I let her finish her frantic defensive rant. I let the heavy silence hang in the air for 10 agonizing seconds, watching Brad's smug confidence slowly return to his face as his wife aggressively defended his honor. Then I started to laugh. It was not a chuckle. It was a deep, genuine laugh that filled the private room. I unzipped my leather tote bag and reached inside. I pulled out a small, sleek, silver flash drive and placed it gently right in the center of the table. I slowly slid it across the polished wood until it stopped exactly an inch away from Brad's folded hands. "I am not intimidated by his intellect, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, dangerous whisper that commanded absolute silence. "And I am definitely not intimidated by a man whose offshore accounts are funded directly by my father's church renovation fund." Brad turned completely ghost white. His jaw practically unhinged as the absolute reality of his situation crashed down on him. The arrogant sneer that usually plastered his features melted into pure, unfiltered terror. Chloe blinked rapidly behind her oversized sunglasses, completely oblivious to the financial treason her husband had just committed against her own father. "What are you talking about, Maya?" she demanded, her shrill voice breaking the heavy silence. "What church fund?" Brad did not let her finish the thought. He abruptly shot up from his chair, his expensive silk tie askew, and grabbed his wife tightly by the elbow. "We are leaving right now," he rasped, his voice trembling with barely contained panic. He threw a crumpled $100 bill onto the pristine table for the drinks and practically dragged a sputtering, highly confused Chloe out of the private dining room. She stumbled over her designer heels, protesting loudly as he hauled her toward the exit. I sat perfectly still, sipping my sparkling water and watching his desperate, frantic retreat. The timer was officially ticking, and Brad knew he was entirely out of time. With the threat of federal prison and a catastrophic megachurch scandal looming directly over their heads, Brad and my father went into complete damage control mode. Vivian was miraculously discharged from the hospital the very next morning, her highly publicized medical emergency completely forgotten in the face of actual impending doom. Bishop Marcus knew he needed a massive infusion of untraceable liquid cash to cover Brad offshore deficit before the church board initiated their quarterly audit. His solution was predictably arrogant and highly secretive. He decided to quietly liquidate the family-prized French-style estate. It was a massive, sprawling property out in the pristine countryside, featuring private vineyards and equestrian facilities that Vivian used exclusively for hosting high-society charity galas. It was worth millions, and my father assumed he could quietly offload it to a commercial developer without anyone in his congregation ever knowing the truth. He deliberately excluded me from every family group text and completely blocked my number, assuming I was entirely out of the loop and incapable of understanding his high-level financial maneuvering. He truly believed he could fix this catastrophic mess behind closed doors. 48 hours later, my father and Brad were sitting inside the gleaming glass-enclosed boardroom of Apex Commercial Real Estate. It was the most elite brokerage firm in the entire metropolitan area, occupying the penthouse floor of a downtown skyscraper. Bishop Marcus sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, wearing his finest tailored clerical suit, radiating an aura of untouchable, supreme authority. He acted as though he owned the entire building. Brad sat to his right, nervously tapping a gold monogrammed pen against his leather portfolio, his leg bouncing anxiously under the table. Across from them sat Julian, a senior acquisition broker known for facilitating massive corporate buyouts. My father was leaning forward, speaking with his signature booming arrogance, completely disregarding standard legal protocols. "We need this transaction finalized in cash by Friday morning," Julian, my father, demanded, waving a dismissive hand at the thick stack of preliminary contracts. "Skip the standard appraisal process and waive the environmental inspections. This estate is an absolute architectural masterpiece. Any developer in this city would kill to acquire it. Just wire the funds to the offshore routing number provided in the dossier, and we will sign the deed over today. There is no need to overcomplicate a simple cash exchange between gentlemen." Julian adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses, looking down at the thick stack of transfer documents with a perfectly neutral, professional expression. Brad impatiently checked his heavy luxury watch, sweating visibly in the climate-controlled room. His desperation was practically suffocating. "We are offering you a highly lucrative discount for a severely expedited closing," Brad added, his voice dripping with forced condescension. "You should be thanking us for bringing this exclusive opportunity directly to your desk, instead of dragging your feet. We have other buyers waiting in the wings who would jump at this price point." Just as Julian picked up his heavy fountain pen to sign the preliminary escrow agreement, I pushed open the heavy frosted glass boardroom doors and stepped confidently onto the plush carpet. The solid thud of the door closing behind me echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. My father whipped his head around his confident sneer, instantly twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Maya, what in God's name are you doing here?" he bellowed, slamming his large hands down flat on the mahogany table. "This is a highly confidential corporate meeting. You have absolutely no business being in this building or interrupting my private affairs." I slowly walked around the perimeter of the large boardroom, my tailored charcoal suit projecting total unbothered authority. My heels clicked sharply against the floor, marking a steady, rhythmic countdown to their complete destruction. I ignored my father's booming voice entirely, keeping my eyes locked on the men at the table. Brad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was flushing a deep, angry crimson as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "Get out of here right now, Maya," he ordered, trying to physically block my path to the table and physically intimidate me into retreating. "You are nothing but a disrespectful college dropout who has zero understanding of high-level real estate transactions. You are actively trying to humiliate your father in front of a major commercial broker out of pure petty spite. Security will drag you out of here in handcuffs if you do not leave this instant. Go back to your cheap little apartment and let the adults handle the real business." I stopped right next to Julian's chair, folding my arms across my jacket. I looked down at my father, whose chest was heaving with righteous indignation. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of intimidation. I looked directly at Julian, who had quietly set his pen down on the table and folded his hands. "You cannot buy this property from Bishop Marcus Julian," I said, my voice echoing crystal clear in the stunned silence of the boardroom. "Because I am your boss, and my limited liability company already owns it." The frantic departure of Julian left the boardroom feeling as though all the oxygen had been violently sucked from the air. Brad stood completely paralyzed, his hand hovering awkwardly in the empty space where the lucrative buyout contracts had been resting just seconds before. My father looked as though he had been physically struck by a high-voltage electrical current. His mouth hung open, his eyes darting frantically between my perfectly calm face and the empty leather chair where the city's most ruthless and efficient commercial broker had just been sitting. I reached into the interior pocket of my tailored charcoal jacket and pulled out a thick, folded document embossed with the heavy gold seal of the county registrar. I tossed it effortlessly onto the center of the massive mahogany table. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud, coming to rest directly over the fresh ink stain Julian had left behind. "There is the actual property deed," I stated, keeping my tone remarkably casual and entirely indifferent. "Fully executed, properly notarized, and legally registered 4 years ago to Apex Holdings, LLC, my company. You cannot sell a house you do not actually own, Dad. And you certainly cannot sell it to the very commercial brokerage firm that I happen to be the majority shareholder of." Brad lunged forward, snatching the heavy deed off the table with clammy, trembling hands. His eyes darted frantically across the dense legal text, scanning the official seals and the binding signatures. "This is a forgery," he gasped, his voice cracking as pure panic finally overwhelmed his arrogant Wall Street facade. "This is a complete fabrication. Marcus owns that French estate outright. He built it from the ground up. He is the bishop of the largest congregation in the state. He does not rent his primary residence from his estranged, dropout daughter. He is a complete financial fraud," I snapped, firing the words back like a loaded weapon. My father stumbled backward, collapsing heavily into his leather executive chair. His chest heaved as he stared at the legal paperwork, shaking violently in Brad's hands. "You bankrupted this family 4 years ago," I said, stepping closer to the table until I was towering over his seated form. "You were drowning in millions of dollars of hidden toxic debt, just trying desperately to keep up with the elite megachurch lifestyle. The leased private jets, the custom-imported Italian suits, the lavish shopping trips to Europe for Vivian and Chloe. You drained every single personal account you had and leveraged the family house to the absolute brink of ruin. The bank sent the final foreclosure notices right around the exact time Chloe was planning her obscenely expensive country club wedding. You were literally weeks away from being thrown out onto the street and losing your entire pastoral empire in a massive public scandal." "That is an absolute lie," my father roared, slamming his heavy fist against the leather armrest. "I managed those finances. I had a complex restructuring plan in motion with my private lenders. You had a massive neon eviction notice waiting to be stapled to the front iron gate," I corrected sharply, not backing down a single inch. "The Board of Deacons was about to audit your personal accounts after several prominent church donors raised red flags. Vivian would have been completely destroyed. She would have never survived the sheer public humiliation of having her high society charity friends watch the county sheriff physically remove her designer belongings from that French-style estate. So I stepped in. I used the quiet capital from my initial software investments to anonymously buy your toxic bank debt and purchase the property outright under my corporate LLC. I saved you from absolute social and financial ruin. I have let you live there completely rent-free for 4 entire years just to protect my mother, fragile pride, and your bloated fragile ego. And instead of using that massive financial grace period to quietly rebuild your personal savings, you let your arrogant son-in-law use the church renovation fund to gamble on offshore margin calls. Brad dropped the deed onto the table as if the heavy paper had physically burned his skin. His breathing was shallow and highly erratic. The crushing realization that his golden ticket out of a $500,000 deficit was entirely worthless hit him with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. He looked at my father, who was sitting completely shell-shocked, his pristine clerical collar suddenly looking like a tightening hangman noose. The grand illusion of his supreme, untouchable authority was entirely shattered into a million jagged pieces. But Brad was a desperate parasite, and parasites always look for a brand new host when they are firmly cornered. He leaned down, placing his shaking hands on the armrests of my father chair. He lowered his head, whispering frantically into the bishop's ear. I could not hear the exact words, but I watched the highly venomous seeds being planted in real time. Brad's eyes darted toward me, filled with pure, desperate malice as he spoke in rapid, hushed tones. He was aggressively twisting the narrative, spinning my silent financial bailout into a calculated, malicious trap. He was telling my father that I had planned this specific public humiliation from the very beginning, that I had deliberately allowed them to believe they were still the wealthy masters of their own domain, just to cruelly pull the rug out from under them when they were most vulnerable and desperate. I watched the ugly psychological transformation happen in a matter of seconds. The initial paralyzing shock on my father's face hardened, melting into something far more dangerous and deeply toxic. The crushing shame of his total financial failures was instantly replaced by a towering defensive fury. He pushed Brad aside and stood up, drawing himself to his full imposing height. His face was contorted with a rage so deep and visceral it transformed his familiar features into a harsh mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at my face, his voice shaking with absolute venom. "You did not save us!" He spat the words echoing violently off the glass walls of the quiet boardroom. "You did not buy that estate to protect your mother or to preserve my pristine legacy. You bought us so you could control us like slaves." Julian, the commercial broker, immediately recognized a detonating bomb when he saw one. He did not ask a single question or attempt to salvage the doomed transaction. He simply snapped his Italian leather briefcase shut with a sharp, definitive click, sweeping his preliminary transfer contracts off the polished mahogany table with practiced efficiency. He looked directly at me, completely ignoring my father's furious, booming voice. "Have a pleasant afternoon, Madam CEO," he said, giving me a crisp, respectful nod. He turned on his heel and practically sprinted out of the glass boardroom, leaving Marcus and Brad entirely speechless in his wake. The sheer reality of my corporate authority hung heavily in the sterile air, suffocating the last remnants of my father's supreme arrogance. The heavy frosted doors had barely swung shut behind the fleeing broker when they violently burst open again. Vivian and Chloe marched into the room, their designer heels sinking deeply into the plush carpet. They had clearly been waiting in the executive lobby, ready to pop expensive champagne the moment the cash buyout was finalized. But the furious shouting echoing through the penthouse had drawn them like moths to a highly toxic flame. My mother took one look at the scattered legal documents and my father's purpling face. "Marcus, what is happening?" she demanded, clutching her pristine crocodile handbag against her chest. My father pointed a trembling finger at me, his voice breaking under the weight of his shattered ego. "She owns the estate, Vivian," he rasped. "Maya bought the bank debt 4 years ago. She has been our secret landlord this entire time." Vivian, perfectly manicured, jaw dropped. The elegant high society facade she had spent decades meticulously cultivating completely vaporized in an instant. She did not hesitate. She lunged across the polished mahogany table, her arms swinging in a wide, vicious arc. The sharp crack of her palm striking my cheek echoed like a whip cracking in the silent boardroom. The physical force of the blow snapped my head to the side, but my feet remained firmly planted on the floor. "You wicked sociopathic manipulator," Vivian screamed, her voice rising to a hysterical screech. "You orchestrated this entire humiliation on purpose. You sat back for years watching us, watching your own father struggle with the heavy weight of our family legacy, and you secretly held our home over our heads like a loaded gun. You are a cold-blooded monster, Maya. You only bought that property so you could play God and watch us dance like miserable puppets for your own sick entertainment. Chloe immediately flanked our mother, wrapping a supportive arm around Vivian, trembling shoulders. She glared at me with absolute triumph, standing proudly right beside a sweating, panicked Brad. Exactly, Chloe sneered, her face twisting with vindictive joy. You are deeply deranged, Maya. You have been plotting to destroy this family since the day Dad realized you would never fit into our elite social circle. You are just a bitter, lonely peasant trying to punish us for being successful. We are the elite, Maya. You cannot break us no matter how many sneaky corporate LLCs you hide behind. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand to rub the stinging red mark blossoming across my left cheek. I simply turned my head back to face them, my expression remaining as calm and perfectly detached as a marble statue. The sheer violent absurdity of their reaction was the ultimate confirmation of everything I had known for 32 years. I had literally saved them from homelessness and public disgrace. I had preserved their luxurious fantasy world at massive personal financial expense, allowing them to maintain their pristine image among the megachurch elite. And their only response was violent physical rage because I had wounded their fragile manufactured pride. I slowly reached inside my leather tote bag. I pulled out a crisp white legal document and placed it squarely on the center of the mahogany table, smoothing out the edges with deliberate measured movements. I clicked my heavy pen and signed my name on the bottom line with a swift, sharp flourish. I slid the paper directly across the polished wood until it hit my folded hands. That is a formal 30-day eviction notice, I stated, my voice completely devoid of any thermal heat. You have exactly 1 month to vacate the premises. I expect the property to be entirely empty, broom swept, and devoid of any lingering family delusions by the 1st of next month. If a single crystal chandelier is missing, or if Vivian attempts to strip the imported marble countertops out of pure spite, my legal team will file criminal property damage charges before you even reach the county line. My father stared at the eviction notice as if it were a highly venomous snake uncoiling on the boardroom table. Vivian gasped, clutching her chest, reverting instantly to her theatrical medical crisis mode, but nobody stepped forward to catch her this time. Brad was too busy staring blankly at the floor, trying to calculate how many hours he had left before his dangerous creditors showed up at his front door to collect their missing $500,000. But Chloe remained entirely defiant. She lifted her chin, tilting her head back to look down her nose at me with supreme, unearned arrogance. You really think this scares us? She mocked, letting out a sharp, derisive laugh that bounced harshly around the boardroom walls. You think kicking us out of one house is going to destroy the Marcus family empire? We do not need your pathetic charity, Maya. We never did. Dad is the head of a massive congregation. The megachurch renovation fund has millions of dollars sitting in liquid cash right now. We will simply withdraw what we need to cover Brad minor margin call and buy a brand new, bigger estate tomorrow morning. We will upgrade to a property in a zip code you could not even afford to drive through. I looked at Chloe's smug, triumphant face. I looked at Brad, whose entire body had just gone rigid with absolute paralyzing terror. I offered my sister a slow, dark, knowing smirk. About that church renovation fund, I whispered, my voice carrying effortlessly across the tense space. You might want to ask your brilliant husband to check the current balance. Chloe's face contorted into a mask of utter confusion. She whipped her head around to look at Brad, fully expecting him to confidently laugh off my ridiculous statement. Instead, she found a man who looked like he was about to physically vomit all over the expensive mahogany table. The blood had entirely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent shade of gray. His jaw hung slack, and a thick bead of cold sweat rolled down his temple. He could not even meet his wife's eyes. I did not wait for the inevitable shrieking meltdown. I turned my back on my stunned family, leaving the 30-day eviction notice resting on the table, and walked out of the glass boardroom. I took the private executive elevator directly down to the underground parking garage where my driver was waiting in my sleek black town car. 20 minutes later, The car pulled up to a towering 60-story skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. This was the actual headquarters of Apex Holdings, my company. I walked through the pristine marble lobby, bypassing the security desk with a simple nod, and took the private elevator straight to the penthouse level. The door slid open to reveal a massive open-concept floor plan, buzzing with quiet, efficient energy. My staff of analysts, attorneys, and portfolio managers worked seamlessly behind rows of curved glass desks. I walked straight past my corner office and headed directly into the secure digital forensics lab. Elias was already waiting for me. He was my lead forensic accountant, a brilliant former federal investigator who could track a single missing dollar through a labyrinth of international shell corporations. He was staring intensely at a wall of glowing digital monitors, his fingers flying across his keyboard in a rapid, rhythmic blur. They took the bait, I asked, stepping up behind his ergonomic mesh chair. Hook, line, and sinker, Elias replied, not taking his eyes off the scrolling data. The moment you dropped that hint about the church fund in the boardroom, Brad completely panicked. He immediately tried to log into his offshore holding accounts from his mobile device. That frantic login attempt gave our tracing software the exact backdoor access we needed to bypass his encryption protocols. We are currently sitting directly inside his private financial network. Pull up the megachurch renovation fund, I ordered, crossing my arms and staring at the central monitor. Let us see exactly how much damage the Golden Boy has actually done. Elias clicked his mouse, pulling up a complex web of financial routing numbers and bank statements. The main congregation account originally held over $12 million. The money had been raised through relentless aggressive tithing campaigns spearheaded by my father. He had promised the congregation a massive state-of-the-art community center, a new youth wing, and a broadcast studio to expand his televangelism empire. The hard-working church members had eagerly drained their own savings accounts to support their beloved Bishop Grand Holy Vision. The screen flashed red as a massive column of numbers populated the spreadsheet. The money is completely gone, Elias stated, his voice completely flat. The current balance is exactly zero. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of absolute disgust wash over me. I had known Brad was stealing to cover his reckless margin calls, but the sheer magnitude of the theft was staggering. He had literally robbed thousands of devout, trusting people. Show me the exact money trail, I demanded. Elias typed rapidly, bringing up a highly sophisticated digital map showing lines branching out from the central church account like a toxic spider web. Brad was running a classic, highly aggressive embezzlement scheme, Elias explained, pointing to a cluster of nodes on the screen. He set up 7 different anonymous shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada. He drafted dozens of fake vendor invoices for construction materials, architectural blueprints, and zoning permits that never actually existed. He wired the church money to these shell companies to pay the fake invoices. From there, the funds were immediately bounced through a series of cryptocurrency exchanges to wash the trail before finally landing right here. Elias tapped the screen, highlighting a single offshore account based in the Cayman Islands. That is Brad's personal holding account, Elias confirmed. He siphoned all $12 million directly into his own pocket to cover his disastrous stock market bets and fund his luxury lifestyle. I leaned closer to the monitor, studying the dates of the massive wire transfers. A sudden, glaring realization hit me. I had grown up watching my father run his church with an iron fist. He trusted absolutely no one with his money. Wait a minute, I said, my eyes narrowing. This makes no logical sense. The church charter strictly dictates that the renovation fund requires dual authorization for any transaction over $10,000. Brad was the financial director, but he could not move millions of dollars by himself. The bank would require a secondary signature to release those funds. Elias turned his chair to face me, his expression turning incredibly grim. You are entirely correct, Maya. Every single one of these fraudulent wire transfers carries 2 verified digital signatures. One belongs to Brad. And the other, I asked, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. Elias hit a key on his keyboard, pulling up a scanned copy of a multi-million-dollar wire authorization form. At the bottom of the page, sitting right next to Brad's signature, was the bold, unmistakable handwriting of Bishop Marcus. My father had signed off on the theft. I stared at his signature, feeling the floor completely drop out from under me. Was it possible my father had just been dangerously negligent? Was he simply signing documents, blindly trusting his slick son-in-law to handle the details? Or did the esteemed bishop explicitly know he was robbing his own loyal congregation blind? I dug deeper into the church internal servers, looking for the authorization logs. Elias said, his voice dropping to a serious, hushed tone. Brad thought he was a digital genius, but he was incredibly sloppy. He used a cloud-based dictation software to record his private meetings, and he forgot to wipe the automatic backup servers. I found a hidden audio file timestamped 3 hours before the first massive wire transfer was initiated. "Play it," I ordered, my voice turning to pure ice. Elias clicked a button, and the crisp, clear sound of my father's deep, booming voice suddenly filled the quiet forensics lab. "You are telling me the market crashed and the money is entirely gone?" Marcus demanded, his voice tight with panic on the recording. "It is a temporary liquidity issue," Brad's voice replied, sounding equally desperate. "I can fix this, Marcus, but I need capital right now or the federal regulators are going to freeze everything. We have to borrow from the renovation fund." "That is $12 million of congregation money," Marcus snapped back. "If the board finds out, they will strip me of my title. I will be ruined." "We route it through the vendor shell companies," Brad urged smoothly. "We write it off as preliminary construction costs. You sign the dual authorizations, and I handle the digital transfer. No one will ever know. When my independent trades recover, we put the money quietly back." There was a heavy, agonizing silence on the recording. Then my father spoke, sealing his own absolute destruction. "Draw up the fake invoices," my father ordered coldly. "We cook the books today." The recording ended with the sharp click of the dictation software shutting off. I stood in the center of the forensics lab, letting my father's actual criminal confession hang heavy in the chilled, climate-controlled air. Elias slowly took off his headphones, his face a mask of absolute disbelief. He had spent his entire career hunting down corporate embezzlers and cartel money launderers, but even he was genuinely shocked by the sheer brazen arrogance of a megachurch bishop openly conspiring to defraud his own devoted congregation. "We have them," Elias whispered, his hands hovering over the illuminated keyboard. "That audio file is the ultimate smoking gun, Maya. The feds will not even need a grand jury to secure an indictment. It is a straight line to federal prison for both of them." I stared at the frozen audio wave on the massive digital monitor. A dark, cold sense of total vindication washed over me. For my entire life, my father had lectured me from his grand pulpit about morality, righteousness, and the absolute necessity of living a pure, unblemished life. He had publicly condemned me as a failure for choosing a secular business path instead of marrying into his elite religious circle. Now I had the undeniable cryptographic proof that his entire holy empire was built on a foundation of rotting criminal deceit. Before I could give the order to secure the evidence, a piercing red alert suddenly flashed across Elias' secondary monitor. The warning sirens of our internal firewall began pinging rapidly, turning the dim room an aggressive shade of crimson. Elias' fingers instantly flew across the keyboard, his eyes tracking the cascading lines of defensive code. "We have a massive external breach attempt," he announced, his voice sharp and purely professional. "Someone is actively trying to brute force their way into your personal corporate servers. They are routing through a heavy proxy network, but the signature matches the digital footprint Brad just used when he checked his offshore accounts." He is panicking, I realized, crossing my arms and watching the attack bounce harmlessly off our military-grade security protocols. He knows the audit is coming, and he knows I hold the deed to the estate. He is terrified I'm going to expose the missing $12 million. "He is doing more than just panicking," Elias corrected, pulling up the data packet the attacker was attempting to inject into our system. "He is trying to frame you, Maya. He is attempting to upload thousands of fake digital receipts and altered wire transfers directly onto your personal hard drive. If he succeeds, it will look exactly like you were the ones secretly controlling his shell companies this entire time. He wants to make you the ultimate scapegoat for the missing megachurch funds." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Brad was an absolute cornered rat. He was not smart enough to breach my network from the outside, but he was desperate enough to try a physical backdoor entry. My phone buzzed aggressively in my pocket. I pulled it out and stared at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Chloe. Maya, I am so incredibly sorry. I had absolutely no idea what Brad and Dad were doing behind my back. I am totally sick to my stomach. Please let me buy you lunch today. I need my sister. I need to make this right. I showed the illuminated screen to Elias. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. Brad cannot hack us from his sad little home office, I said, pocketing the phone. So he is sending his incredibly naive wife to do his dirty work. He wants her to physically plant the forged evidence on my machine. Elias caught on immediately, returning my dark smile. He pulled a sleek silver flash drive from his desk drawer and plugged it into his secure terminal. Give me exactly 20 minutes, he said, typing furiously. I will write a customized Trojan horse program. You let her plug her infected drive into your laptop, and my code will aggressively piggyback right off her hardware. It will act as a digital boomerang shooting straight back to the source and granting us total unfettered access to every single encrypted device Brad owns. Set the trap I ordered. 2 hours later, I walked into a brightly lit, trendy organic cafe downtown, carrying my silver laptop securely under my arm. Chloe was already sitting at a corner booth wearing oversized sunglasses and dabbing at her eyes with a linen napkin. She looked the part of the devastated, betrayed wife perfectly. I sat down across from her, placing my laptop directly on the table between us. Maya, she whimpered, reaching out to grab my hand. I pulled my hand away smoothly, opening my laptop and waking up the screen. Chloe's eyes immediately locked onto the glowing keyboard like a heat-seeking missile. I am listening, Chloe, I said, keeping my tone completely neutral. She launched into a highly rehearsed theatrical performance. She cried she completely played the victim, and she vehemently swore she had been totally blinded by Brad's manipulative lies. She claimed she wanted to leave him and begged me for my protection. She painted herself as a helpless pawn caught in the crossfire of male corporate greed. I simply nodded, taking slow sips of my black coffee, giving her just enough rope to hang herself with. My phone suddenly rang, a loud, obnoxious tone I had specifically set for this exact moment. I looked at the screen, feigning a look of total urgency. This is an international client call, I lied, standing up abruptly. I have to take this outside where it is quiet. Do not touch my things, Chloe. I will be right back. I left the table, leaving my unlocked laptop sitting wide open. I walked quickly toward the front exit, pushing through the heavy glass doors and stepping out onto the bustling sidewalk. But I did not walk away. I immediately ducked behind the cafe's large front window, positioning myself perfectly out of sight while maintaining a crystal-clear view of our corner booth. I watched Chloe's behavior change the absolute second she thought she was alone. The fake tears completely vanished. Her face hardened into a mask of pure, cold determination. She reached into her expensive designer purse and pulled out a small, black USB drive. She quickly glanced around the cafe, ensuring no one was watching her before she leaned across the table and jammed the drive directly into the side port of my laptop. A slow, dark smirk played across my lips as I watched her frantically tap the keyboard exactly as her husband had instructed her. She genuinely thought she was destroying my entire life. She truly believed she was securing her own luxurious future by framing me for federal wire fraud. My phone vibrated in my hand. I looked down at a secure text message from Elias. Trojan horse deployed successfully, Elias wrote. The boomerang is active. We are currently inside Brad's private encrypted network. We have his hidden passwords, his secret client ledgers, and his deleted offshore banking emails. We own him, Maya. I looked back through the cafe window, watching my sister hastily yank the flash drive out of my computer and drop it back into her purse. She smoothed her hair and arranged her features back into the perfect picture of a grieving sister. She had no idea she had just handed me the absolute keys to her husband's complete destruction. Let her enjoy her fake lunch. I was about to serve the entire family for dinner. I walked out of the organic cafe, leaving my untouched coffee on the table and stepped into the waiting town car. Elias was already waiting on the secure line when I connected my headset. "We have the entire digital kingdom," Maya Elias confirmed, his voice buzzing with pure technical adrenaline. Brad kept meticulous records of his own crimes. He literally color-coded the offshore transfers. I instructed Elias to package every single forged invoice, every illegal wire transfer, and the damning audio file into one massive, heavily encrypted broadcast payload. We both knew my father would never simply wait to be slaughtered. He was a creature of absolute control, and his first instinct would be to aggressively hijack the public narrative. He would try to crush my credibility before I could even expose a single page of his financial treason. Less than 24 hours later, Bishop Marcus executed his desperate, preemptive strike. He summoned the executive board of deacons for an emergency closed-door session. The church boardroom was a staggering display of tax-exempt wealth, featuring a massive oval table cut from a single slab of imported marble and surrounded by 12 high-backed leather chairs. The deacons were the most elite power players in the city. Wealthy commercial developers, conservative politicians, and retired state judges who blindly funded my father's extravagant pastoral lifestyle. They were men and women who demanded absolute perfection and total financial transparency from the institutions they supported. My father stood at the head of the marble table wearing his most somber, dark-tailored suit. He bowed his head, pressing his fingertips to his temples, projecting the perfect, flawless image of a heartbroken, weary patriarch. "My dear friends," Marcus began, his booming voice dropped to a masterful, sorrowful whisper. "I have called you here today to discuss a matter of deep personal tragedy. It concerns my daughter Maya." He paused, wiping a completely fabricated tear from his eye. "She has suffered a severe psychological break. Her mental instability has spiraled into a dangerous, obsessive vendetta against me and this holy institution." He paced slowly around the room, placing his hands on the backs of the deacons' chairs as he spoke. He painted me as a deeply bitter secular dropout who despised their righteous mission. He claimed my jealousy over Chloe's perfect marriage and Brad's unparalleled financial genius had finally driven me to pure, unadulterated madness. "Maya has hired criminal hackers," Marcus lied smoothly, his face an absolute mask of righteous sorrow. "She is attempting to manufacture a fake financial scandal to humiliate this church. She wants to shatter the faith of our congregation out of pure spite and delusion. She is actively trying to hack our secure servers to plant fabricated evidence against her own family." Brad seamlessly took over the presentation, stepping up to the massive 80-inch smart screen dominating the front wall. He looked remarkably composed, his hair perfectly slicked back, his bespoke suit completely immaculate. He acted as though the devastating realization in the commercial real estate office had never even happened. He tapped his silver tablet, projecting a pristine, beautifully formatted financial spreadsheet onto the massive screen. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. "The mega-church renovation fund is in perfect absolute health," Brad stated, gesturing confidently to the highly fabricated numbers. "Every single dollar of our $12 million campaign is completely accounted for and safely earning interest in our primary institutional accounts. However, we have reason to believe Maya is planning to distribute highly sophisticated digital forgeries to this board. She wants to create a localized panic." Brad looked around the table, making sincere eye contact with the wealthy donors. "We must protect the flock from this toxic interference. We are asking the board to formally excommunicate Maya from the congregation and authorize our legal counsel to file an immediate permanent restraining order against her. We must legally sever all ties before her mental illness severely damages our pristine reputation." The deacons murmured in sympathetic agreement. They were completely spellbound by the slick, highly choreographed performance. Elder Thomas, the billionaire chairman of the board, shook his white head sadly. "Marcus, we are deeply sorry for your family pain," Thomas said, folding his manicured hands on the marble table. but we must protect the integrity of the church above all else. I call for an immediate vote to officially excommunicate Maya and ban her from all church properties immediately. Hands began to rise around the marble table. They were literally seconds away from permanently erasing me from the community and legally shielding themselves from my upcoming revelations. I sat in my penthouse office staring at a live hidden feed of the boardroom Elias had easily tapped into through the church unsecured security cameras. I did not feel a single ounce of sorrow watching my father attempt to publicly destroy my sanity to save his own skin. He had pushed his chips all the way to the center of the table, completely unaware that I literally owned the casino. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my pristine glass desk, and gave Elias the final command. "Drop the payload, Elias," I said, my voice ice cold. "Burn it all down." Inside the church boardroom, the atmosphere of solemn agreement was violently shattered. A deafening high-pitched chime erupted simultaneously from every single device in the room. 12 private cell phones, 12 expensive tablets, and 3 associate laptops all began ringing and vibrating wildly on the marble table. The coordinated digital assault bypassed every single security protocol the church possessed. Elder Thomas jumped, pulling his phone from his pocket with a deep frown. My father froze, his hand suspended in midair as the 80-inch smart screen behind Brad violently flickered. The pristine fake financial spreadsheet instantly dissolved into a sea of loud digital static. Brad spun around, his confident smirk vanishing as the giant screen snapped back into crystal clear focus. The board of deacons gasped in unison. Projected in massive, high-definition letters was the live, unalterable feed of Brad Personal Cayman Islands bank account. The screen clearly displayed the exact routing numbers matching the church renovation fund flowing directly into Brad Offshore Holding Company in real time. It showed the millions of dollars systematically drained away to cover his massive private gambling debts. But I did not stop at simply showing them the stolen money. The giant screen split down the middle, displaying a giant green audio wave file. The crisp, undeniable sound of my father's voice suddenly blasted through the boardroom's surround sound speakers, overriding the frantic buzzing of the infected tablets. "Draw up the fake invoices," Marcus' voice commanded, coldly echoing off the marble walls for every single elite donor to hear. "We cooked the books today." Total bedlam erupted inside the church boardroom the moment my father's recorded voice confirmed the massive financial fraud. Elder Thomas, the billionaire chairman, slammed his heavy fist onto the imported marble table, demanding church security immediately lock the doors. Deacons were shouting over each other, some pulling out their phones to desperately dial their private attorneys and federal authorities. Others physically backing away from Marcus as if he were suddenly highly infectious. My father staggered backward, his face a mask of absolute ghostly terror as he stared at his own damning financial ruin projected in high definition. Brad did not wait for the inevitable arrest. He scrambled backward, knocking his heavy leather chair to the floor, and bolted straight through the side exit before security could even register his movement. I watched the live hidden feed for exactly 10 more seconds, soaking in the absolute destruction of my father's carefully constructed holy empire. Then I closed my laptop screen, slicing off the feed with a sharp click. My work in the shadows was officially done. Across town, Chloe was floating on a cloud of supreme, unearned confidence. She walked through the arched mahogany front doors of her sprawling, heavily mortgaged estate, kicking off her designer heels and tossing her exclusive Birkin bag onto the entryway console. She was practically vibrating with vindictive joy. She genuinely believed her theatrical lunch performance had worked perfectly. She poured herself a tall glass of chilled, sparkling water and wandered leisurely into Brad's private home office, intending to gloat. She noticed his expensive leather golf bag leaning haphazardly against the tufted leather sofa. A sharp, unnatural buzzing sound vibrated from the front pocket of the heavy golf bag. Chloe frowned deeply. She unzipped the thick canvas pocket and reached inside her perfectly manicured fingers, brushing against cold, smooth metal. She pulled out a cheap, heavy black burner phone. It was the kind of disposable device street-level criminals used, not the sophisticated financial director of an elite megachurch. The screen was brightly illuminated. Elias, brutal custom Trojan horse, had not just ripped open Brad encrypted servers, it had forcefully bypassed the security locks on every single digital device connected to his personal cloud network. The burner phone was sitting wide open, completely unlocked and totally exposed. Chloe stared at the glaring screen, her initial idle curiosity rapidly curdling into cold, paralyzing dread. The open application was a secure encrypted messaging app, but the contents were now laid entirely bare. She saw a massive, continuous string of recent wire transfer confirmations, but they were not going to offshore hedge funds or anonymous corporate shell companies. They were going to a joint checking account registered under the names Brad Blackwood and Sarah Blackwood. Chloe's hands began to shake violently, rattling her expensive bracelets. She tapped the photo gallery icon. Thousands of high-resolution images instantly populated the screen. She saw Brad standing on the pristine, manicured lawn of a massive, sprawling colonial estate. It was not their house. Beside him was a stunning blonde white woman wearing a classic tennis sweater and a bright, heavy diamond tennis bracelet Chloe immediately recognized. Brad had claimed he bought that exact expensive bracelet for his mother last Christmas. There were more photos, so many more. Brad tossing a laughing little blonde boy into a sparkling swimming pool. Brad holding a baby girl wrapped in a plush pink towel. Brad cheering wildly at a middle school equestrian event for an older teenage boy. 3 children. A completely secret established family, living a life of absolute elite luxury in a leafy Connecticut suburb. Chloe's breath hitched sharply in her tight throat. She scrolled frantically through the text messages. Sarah had texted Brad just 2 hours ago. The invoice for the new stable extension cleared, honey, Sarah wrote, followed by a string of heart emojis. The contractor starts Monday. I love you so much. Hurry back from your business trip. The sickening truth hit Chloe like a physical blow to the stomach. The mega church funds were not just covering bad stock trades or aggressive margin calls. They were entirely funding this massive hidden second life. Brad was legally married to this woman in Connecticut. Chloe was not his true wife. She was just a convenient, highly profitable mark. She was the naive, gullible daughter of a wealthy megachurch bishop, providing Brad with the perfect bulletproof cover and a limitless bank account to siphon from. Her entire elite society identity, her grand marriage, her superior status, it was all a meticulously engineered predatory lie. While Chloe was busy looking down on me, her husband was using her to rob her own father blind to fund his real family. The roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet suburban afternoon. Chloe whipped her head toward the office window. Brad's sports car tore into the long circular driveway, stopping at a harsh, aggressive angle. The tires squealed violently against the imported paving stones. Brad threw the car door open. His designer tie was ripped loose, his suit jacket was missing, and his face was a mask of absolute feral panic. He had just fled the boardroom disaster and was clearly rushing home to pack a bag. Chloe did not hesitate. The paralyzing shock instantly mutated into a blinding, white-hot rage. She sprinted out of the office, bursting through the heavy front doors and marching straight down the stone steps. Brad was rushing toward the house, but he froze completely when he saw his wife standing in the driveway, blocking his path. Chloe held the black burner phone high in the air, the screen still brightly displaying a family portrait of Brad, Sarah, and their 3 blonde children. "You sick, twisted sociopath!" Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet, wealthy neighborhood. "You stole millions from my father's church to fund a secret wife and 3 kids in Connecticut. You used me. You built this entire marriage just to steal from my family." Brad's eyes locked onto the burner phone. For a fraction of a second, sheer absolute terror flashed across his face as he realized Elias had cracked his ultimate secret. But the terror vanished instantly, replaced by something infinitely darker. The charming, charismatic son-in-law facade completely melted away, revealing the cold, calculating predator underneath. He did not cower. He did not drop to his knees and beg for forgiveness. He lunged forward, closing the distance between them in two massive, aggressive strides. He grabbed Chloe by the upper arm, his fingers biting brutally into her skin. Chloe gasped, dropping the phone onto the hard driveway as the sheer physical force of his grip paralyzed her. Brad leaned in until his face was inches from hers, his breath hot and ragged against her cheek. "You need to shut your mouth right now!" Brad snarled, his voice dropping to a vicious, deadly whisper. Maya just broadcasted my entire financial history to the Board of Deacons. The federal authorities are probably already on their way here. But if I go down for mega church embezzlement, I am taking you and your precious father right down with me. You signed the joint tax returns too, sweetheart. Every single one of them. Chloe stood completely frozen on the immaculate paving stones as Brad ripped his sports car door open and violently peeled out of the long circular driveway. He left thick black tire marks scarred across her shattered reality. She was legally bound to a federal criminal and entirely complicit in massive corporate tax evasion. The pristine Marcus family empire she had spent her entire life fiercely guarding was officially burning to the ground, and she was standing right in the center of the roaring flames. Several hours later, the city skyline glittered brightly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my luxury penthouse. The sheer quiet of the late-night hour was suddenly broken by the sharp, harsh buzz of my private security intercom. Elias had gone home hours ago, leaving me completely alone to monitor the digital fallout of our explosive boardroom broadcast. I walked over to the marble entry console and tapped the glowing security screen. My night concierge looked unusually tense. "Madame C.E." "Oh, your father is in the lobby," the concierge stated, his voice tight with obvious apprehension. "He bypassed the main security desk and is demanding to be led up to your private residence. He says it is a dire family emergency of the utmost importance." "Send him up," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any thermal emotion. The private elevator chimed a few moments later, opening directly into my expansive foyer. Bishop Marcus stepped out, and the sight of him was genuinely jarring. The immaculate, polished religious icon who commanded massive arenas of thousands of weeping followers was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified, broken old man. His custom-tailored designer suit jacket was wrinkled and unbuttoned. His usually perfect silver hair was disheveled, sticking up at odd angles where he had clearly been running his shaking hands through it in pure panic. He was sweating profusely despite the cool, crisp climate control of the penthouse. "Maya," he gasped, stepping onto the polished hardwood floors, as if his legs could barely support his own weight. "You have to listen to me. You have to understand what Brad told me. I did not offer him a drink. I did not invite him to sit on the plush, expensive designer sofas. I stood by the massive glass window looking at him with absolute emotional detachment. You authorized the theft of $12 million from your own loyal congregation," I said plainly, letting the heavy reality of his crimes hang in the air. "Your signature is permanently embedded in the digital metadata of every single fraudulent wire transfer Elias pulled from your servers. The entire Board of Deacons heard your recorded voice explicitly agreeing to cook the books." He violently shook his head, stepping closer, but keeping a careful, wary distance. "He lied to me, Maya. Brad swore to me it was a temporary high-yield hedge fund investment. He promised me he had exclusive insider access to a private corporate portfolio that would absolutely double the megachurch renovation fund in less than 6 months. We were terribly behind on the construction schedule. The building committee was breathing down my neck, demanding progress. I honestly thought I was securing the financial future of our holy ministry. I had absolutely no idea he was funneling the congregation money into anonymous offshore accounts to cover his reckless margin calls. I certainly had no idea he was secretly funding a whole other family in Connecticut. You must believe me, Maya. I am a victim of his sophisticated deceit." It was a pathetic, desperate, calculated lie. A man who ruthlessly built a massive, lucrative televangelism empire did not accidentally sign away millions of dollars to untraceable shell companies without understanding exactly what he was doing. He knew the money was being moved illegally, he just arrogantly thought Brad was smart enough not to get caught. Now that the embezzlement scheme had violently exploded in his face, he was trying to play the naive, trusting religious victim. I just watched you attempt to publicly excommunicate me, I reminded him, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You stood in front of your wealthy elite deacons and tried to brand your own daughter as a mentally unstable hacker to protect your own manufactured image. And now you are standing in my living room begging for sympathy. I am begging for your grace, Maya, he pleaded, his voice cracking as he actually dropped to his knees right there on my expensive Persian rug. You have billions of dollars at your disposal. You bought the mega church bank debt with your own pocket change. $12 million is absolutely nothing to you. It is a tiny rounding error in your massive corporate accounts. You could quietly refill the renovation fund account by tomorrow morning. You could completely erase the deficit before the federal bank regulators force an official audit. You can make this entire horrific nightmare just disappear. I stared down at the man who had spent 3 decades making me feel like an invisible, heavy disappointment. He looked up at me with wild, desperate eyes and offered me the one thing he wrongly thought I had spent my entire life craving. Do this for me. Maya and I will give you everything, he promised, his words spilling out in a frantic, pathetic rush. I will completely disown Chloe and Brad. I will throw them out of the family and banish them from the church forever. I will bring you up on the main stage this Sunday in front of 10,000 devoted people and publicly name you as the pride of the Marcus family. You will be my true heir. You will be the golden child. Chloe is absolutely nothing compared to you. She is weak and foolish, but you are brilliant. We can rule the city together. Just please, Maya, write the check. He stayed on his knees, panting heavily, waiting for me to eagerly accept his pathetic conditional love. He truly believed my entire corporate empire and my strategic takedown were just a convoluted, desperate plea for his fatherly validation. He thought I was still that little girl, desperately trying to be perfect, hoping he would look away from his precious congregation long enough to notice me. I reached into the pocket of my silk trousers and slowly pulled out my mobile phone. I tapped the screen, ensuring the brightness illuminated the dark space between us. I held the device up, turning it slowly so my father could clearly see the active call timer counting upward on the screen. He squinted at the bright display, his eyes scanning the name of the caller actively connected on the other end of the line. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a polished corpse. He stared in absolute horror at the bold letters indicating the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. You would sell out God to save a con artist, I whispered, my voice echoing with icy finality across the room. And you would sell out Chloe to save yourself. Special Agent Vance, did you hear that? I asked, keeping my eyes entirely locked on my father, trembling form on the floor. Loud and clear, Ms. Marcus, the federal agent voice echoed through the phone speaker, crisp and completely authoritative. We have the full admission recorded and logged into evidence. Special agents are already reviewing the encrypted digital packages your team securely uploaded to our servers an hour ago. The wire fraud evidence is absolutely irrefutable. My father let out a pathetic guttural sob and buried his face in his hands. He looked like a deflated balloon, completely stripped of the righteous power he had wielded over our family for decades. I ended the call and stepped over his kneeling body, walking toward my private elevator. I instructed my security desk to escort him out of the building and ban him from ever entering the premises again. I had zero room for pity. By the next morning, the federal trap was meticulously set. Agent Vance and his elite financial crimes division had spent the entire night analyzing Elias' heavily encrypted data dumps. They had everything they needed to completely dismantle the Marcus religious empire, but they wanted to execute a flawless, sweeping takedown. The 25th anniversary church gala was scheduled for tomorrow night at the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. Every single corrupt deacon, the offshore banking liaisons, my father and Brad would all be dressed in tuxedos under one glittering roof. The FBI planned to lock down the entire venue and execute multiple federal arrest warrants simultaneously. But Brad Blackwood was a cornered, desperate animal, and he was entirely unwilling to go down without a violent fight. He knew I possessed the damning financial records, but he foolishly believed he could still terrorize me into silence before the gala. Since he could no longer access my heavily fortified corporate network, he decided to attack the physical world. At exactly noon, my phone rang with an urgent, frantic incoming call. It was David Thorne, the brilliant, ruthless forensic accountant I had hired to trace the final layers of Brad Connecticut real estate purchases. David had just left his downtown firm and was walking to his car in an underground parking garage. "Maya, they found me!" David shouted, his voice pitching with raw, unadulterated terror. The sound of shattering glass echoed violently through the phone speaker, followed by a heavy metallic crunch. Two massive men in unmarked black tactical gear had ambushed him between the concrete pillars. They smashed the driver's side window of his sedan with a steel baton, dragging him out onto the cold concrete. I stood up from my glass desk, my blood running absolutely cold. "David, are you hurt? What is happening?" One of the men grabbed David's phone, shouting directly into the receiver. "Your little accountant is going to take a permanent vacation, Ms. Marcus," the gruff, aggressive voice snarled. "Brad says you need to stop digging into the Connecticut accounts immediately. If you do not permanently delete the financial data and cancel your little crusade right now, the next time we visit David, we will not just smash his laptop, we will break his hands." The line went completely dead. Brad had officially crossed the absolute point of no return. He had escalated this from a tense white-collar family dispute into a highly dangerous criminal standoff. He thought utilizing cheap hired muscle would trigger my childhood insecurities and force me to retreat into the shadows, just like my father always wanted. He severely underestimated the woman I had become. I immediately contacted Aegis Defense Solutions, an elite private military contracting firm utilized by international billionaires and foreign dignitaries. I bypassed their standard corporate protocols and wired a massive retainer directly to their director of operations. Within 30 minutes, a team of 6 heavily armed former Special Forces operatives extracted a terrified David from the parking garage and relocated him to a secure, unlisted penthouse suite equipped with bulletproof glass and a private armed detail. I did not stop there. I transformed my own life into an impenetrable fortress. 2 massive, highly trained security operatives in tailored suits flanked me at all times, while a specialized counter-surveillance team swept my offices and vehicles for tracking devices. I sent a convoy of black tactical SUVs to Elias' hidden technical hub, ensuring my lead hacker was completely protected by heavily armed guards. I sat in my office flanked by 2 towering security contractors, watching the live feed of David safely continuing his forensic audit from the secure bunker. Brad's intimidation tactic had failed spectacularly. Instead of silencing me, he had only provoked me to unleash the full devastating weight of my vast financial resources. I was no longer just the forgotten black sheep of the Marcus family playing defense. I was a sovereign corporate powerhouse commanding a private army. My phone vibrated sharply on the pristine glass desk. It was an encrypted text message from a blocked number, but the arrogant, threatening tone was unmistakably Brad. He had clearly realized that David was safely extracted and that his hired thugs had been completely neutralized by my elite security forces. The net was rapidly closing around his throat, and his panic was transforming into pure, venomous rage. "Show up to the gala tomorrow night and I will make sure you leave in a body bag," the text message read. "You are out of your league, Maya. You have no idea what kind of dangerous people I owe money to. Back off or you are dead." I stared at the glowing screen, feeling absolutely no fear. I had spent my entire life being bullied, silenced, and dismissed by arrogant men who believed they held all the power. My father had tried to erase my existence to protect his holy image, and now his fraudulent son-in-law was threatening my life to protect his stolen fortune. They both fundamentally failed to understand that I was the one holding all the cards. I controlled the digital evidence, I controlled the federal timeline, and I controlled the narrative. I picked up the phone, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard with absolute supreme confidence. I did not type out a lengthy emotional response or a frightened plea for negotiation. I wanted Brad to understand exactly how deeply he had failed. "I already picked out my dress," I replied, hitting send. I tossed the encrypted phone onto my pristine glass desk and turned toward the heavy black garment bag hanging silently in the corner of my office. Brad completely believed he could still bully me into submission, using cheap parking garage thugs and desperate violent threats. He truly thought the forgotten outcast daughter of the Marcus family would simply fold under the pressure and run back into the shadows. He was about to learn a very painful, permanent lesson about power. Tomorrow night was going to be an absolute masterpiece of public destruction. The 25th anniversary megachurch gala was widely considered the absolute pinnacle of African American elite society in our city. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel had been entirely transformed into a staggering display of tax-exempt wealth and spiritual royalty. Massive towering floral arrangements of imported white orchids flanked the entrance, while crystal ice sculptures gleamed under the warm, ambient lighting. A long, flawless red carpet stretched from the busy street all the way up the marble stairs, sectioned off by heavy velvet ropes. The city's most powerful political figures, wealthy commercial real estate developers, and local celebrities crowded the entrance, sipping vintage champagne and waiting to pay their respects to the bishop. My parents arrived first, establishing their total dominance over the event. Bishop Marcus and my mother Vivian stepped out of a chauffeured obsidian Maybach, projecting the ultimate flawless image of the highly blessed, untouchable couple. My father wore a custom-tailored velvet dinner jacket, smiling his booming, charismatic smile as he waved generously to the flashing cameras of the local press. He warmly shook hands with the mayor and embraced the chief of police, playing his role perfectly. Vivian clung tightly to his arm, absolutely dripping in heavy diamond jewelry, playing the dutiful, supportive matriarch. To the uneducated observer, they looked like absolute royalty. Behind the polished smiles, however, I knew my father was sweating pure fear, wondering if I was going to leak the financial data to the federal authorities. Brad and Chloe made their grand entrance next, arriving in a sleek European sports car. Brad stepped onto the red carpet looking utterly immaculate in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo. He aggressively played the role of the genius savior son-in-law, confidently adjusting his expensive cufflinks and flashing his brilliant predatory smile for the photographers. He genuinely believed his violent ambush had worked perfectly. He thought I was cowering in my secure penthouse, entirely too terrified to ruin his night. Beside him, Chloe looked physically ill, despite her heavy layer of flawless, expensive makeup. She wore a stunning designer gown, but her body was rigid with sheer absolute terror. Brad kept a brutal, bruising grip on the small of her back, physically forcing her forward and silently demanding she smile for the cameras. She was completely trapped by his vicious blackmail. She was forced to parade around the elite society event as the happy, devoted wife, all while knowing her husband was a massive fraud who used her father church to fund a secret white wife and 3 blonde children in Connecticut. The psychological torture of playing the perfect couple was clearly eating her alive, but she dutifully forced a wide plastic smile for the media. Inside the velvet ropes, the family gathered at the top of the grand marble staircase for their premiere group photograph. The church media team was broadcasting the arrival live to the thousands of congregation members watching online. Marcus leaned in very close to Brad, keeping his smile fixed for the flashing bulbs, but speaking through tightly gritted teeth. "Has the Maya situation been fully handled?" Marcus whispered, his voice tight with lingering panic. "She will not be showing up tonight," Brad replied smoothly, exuding pure, arrogant relief. I made sure the little hacker clearly understood the physical consequences of crossing my path. "The problem is permanently contained. Just smile for the cameras, Marcus. The money is safe." They posed closely together, the perfect holy dynasty, completely untouchable and entirely unified. But their manufactured victory lasted for exactly 5 more seconds. The deafening, aggressive roar of heavy, high-performance engines suddenly drowned out the polite classical music playing near the entrance. The flashing strobe lights of the paparazzi immediately shifted away from the Marcus family as the crowd turned toward the street in sheer confusion. A massive, highly coordinated convoy of 6 armored black tactical SUVs rolled smoothly up to the curb, completely blocking the main hotel entrance. The sheer, aggressive military precision of the motorcade caused a ripple of shocked, anxious gasps to sweep through the wealthy crowd. 4 massive men in tailored dark suits and discreet communication earpieces stepped out of the lead and chased vehicles, immediately establishing a secure defensive perimeter around the center flagship SUV. The private security contractors from Aegis Defense Solutions moved with lethal efficiency, forcing the paparazzi to step back and creating a clear, pristine walkway. The heavy rear door of the center vehicle opened. I stepped out onto the red carpet, and the collective, polite silence of the crowd was instantly shattered by a frantic, deafening explosion of camera flashes. I wore a breathtaking, custom crimson, haute couture gown that swept the marble floor, a dress specifically engineered to demand absolute, supreme authority. The deep, rich fabric moved like liquid fire under the bright lights. I did not look like a disgraced secular dropout or a bitter, forgotten daughter. I looked like a ruthless corporate queen, arriving to forcefully claim her stolen throne. But I did not walk the long red carpet alone. A tall, distinguished older man stepped out of the SUV behind me, smoothing his tuxedo jacket and elegantly offering me his arm. A collective shocked whisper ripped through the elite attendees as they immediately recognized my escort. It was Arthur Sterling, the billionaire CEO of the National Bank, serving as the primary corporate sponsor for the gala tonight. He was arguably the most powerful financial figure in the entire state, and he was personally escorting me past the velvet ropes. He knew I possessed the church debt, and he knew I was the one truly in control of the city commercial real estate market. The paparazzi went absolutely wild, screaming my name and snapping thousands of high-definition photos of our arrival. I linked my arm through Arthur's arm and glided effortlessly up the crimson carpet, flanked entirely by my elite armed security detail. I projected pure, unadulterated power. I looked up and locked eyes with my family standing frozen at the top of the grand stairs. Vivian dropped her crystal clutch to the floor with a sharp, audible crack, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. Chloe let out a small, terrified gasp, shrinking away from Brad. Brad's face completely drained of color, his arrogant, confident smirk instantly collapsing into pure, sickening dread as he realized his violent threats had meant absolutely nothing. And Bishop Marcus? My father simply stared at me, his jaw literally hitting the floor. He watched the daughter he had spent decades treating like garbage walk up the stairs, commanding more respect, wealth, and power than he could ever dream of possessing. He knew right then that his empire was already dead. Arthur Sterling guided me up the final marble steps directly toward my frozen family. Marcus automatically extended his hand, pasting on his signature pastoral smile, expecting Arthur to greet him as the guest of honor. Instead, the billionaire bank CEO walked right past my father, completely ignoring his outstretched hand. The sheer disrespect was a physical blow to a man whose entire existence relied on public worship. Arthur signaled to a group of elite banking executives standing near the VIP velvet ropes. The men in sharp custom tuxedos immediately abandoned their conversations and swarmed around me. They bowed their heads in deep respect, completely turning their backs on the bishop and his golden son-in-law. Arthur raised his glass of vintage champagne, commanding the attention of the surrounding elite circle. "Gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice carrying effortlessly over the ambient string quartet playing softly in the background. "Allow me to formally introduce the absolute visionary behind our most lucrative downtown acquisitions. Maya is not just our top portfolio manager. She is the most influential stealth billionaire in this entire city and the sovereign owner of the commercial debt holding this very building together." The executives murmured in genuine awe, raising their glasses to toast my newly revealed empire. My father stood completely ostracized in his own church gala, reduced to a mere spectator in my towering shadow. Brad literally took a step backward, bumping into a marble pillar, as the reality of my financial dominance finally crushed his arrogant delusions. My mother Vivian possessed a primal predatory instinct for social survival. She saw the intense concentration of paparazzi shifting their heavy lenses away from her and locking securely onto me. She recognized that the ultimate epicenter of wealth and power had just violently transferred from her husband to the daughter she had ruthlessly discarded. Desperate to maintain her relevance and leech off my sudden glorious spotlight, she lunged forward. She slapped on a brilliant fabricated smile and reached out both hands, intending to aggressively latch onto my bare arm for a viral mother-daughter photo op. She never even made contact. Two towering Aegis defense operatives stepped forward with lightning speed. They moved like solid walls of black Kevlar, physically blocking Vivian path and brutally shoving her backward. She stumbled against a tall crystal ice sculpture, her expensive diamond necklace catching the harsh glare of the security team flashlights. "Madam, please step back," a security contractor commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion, treating my mother exactly like a dangerous, unstable stalker. Vivian's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. She looked around frantically, realizing that the entire lobby of wealthy elites had just watched her get physically repelled by her own daughter's private security force. She opened her mouth to scream an insult, but the cold, dead stares of the armed operatives instantly silenced her. Chloe let out a sharp, embarrassed whimper, shrinking further behind Brad to avoid the blinding flashes of the cameras capturing their utter humiliation. I did not even blink. I simply adjusted my crimson silk gown and continued walking into the grand ballroom, flanked by my protective detail and the most powerful bankers in the state. The grand ballroom was a staggering display of opulent excess. 1,000 wealthy donors, conservative politicians, and elite church members sat at massive round tables draped in imported white silk. The room was decorated with towering white orchid centerpieces and illuminated by massive cascading crystal chandeliers. The atmosphere was thick with expensive perfume and the quiet, continuous clinking of crystal glasses. As I took my seat at the premier sponsor table directly in the front row, the house lights began to dim. A lone, heavy spotlight illuminated the main stage. It was time for the keynote address. Bishop Marcus practically sprinted to the polished acrylic podium. He was desperate to seize control of the narrative and frantically needed to secure immediate capital to cover the massive bleeding hole in his fraudulent ledgers. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning completely white under the strain. Sweat glistened heavily on his forehead, under the bright stage lights entirely betraying his polished facade. "My beloved flock," Marcus boomed, his voice trembling with an unnatural, frantic energy that echoed through the cavernous space. "Tonight we celebrate 25 years of absolute divine prosperity. But our sacred mission requires continuous, unrelenting sacrifice. I am calling on every single one of you tonight to open your hearts and your checkbooks for our Holy Renovation Fund. We need absolute, unprecedented generosity to build our future." He opened his mouth to launch into his standard aggressive, guilt-driven financial pitch. He intended to squeeze every single dollar out of his devoted followers to save himself from federal prison. He never got the chance to say another word. I stood up from my front row table. The crimson silk of my gown caught the brilliant stage lighting as I calmly walked up the side stairs and stepped directly onto the main platform. Marcus' eyes went wide with sheer feral panic. He leaned into the microphone to frantically call for church security, but Elias was already 3 steps ahead. From his secure remote technical bunker, my brilliant hacker smoothly hijacked the hotel's entire audio-visual system. The microphone in my father hand went completely dead, emitting a sharp final click. The massive surround sound speakers transitioned seamlessly to the sleek wireless lapel microphone I had discreetly clipped to the plunging neckline of my dress. I walked right up to the podium and forcefully shoved my father aside. He stumbled backward, utterly powerless on his own stage, stripped of his voice and his authority. I looked out over the vast sea of 1,000 upturned faces staring at me in absolute dead silence. The wealthy donors, the corrupt deacons, and my shattered family all waited with bated breath. "I am making a personal donation of $2 million tonight," I announced, my voice echoing with crystal-clear authority across the massive ballroom. Exactly the amount that is mysteriously missing from my father accounts. The sheer acoustic force of my announcement hit the grand ballroom like a physical shockwave. For one single agonizing second, absolute dead silence reigned over the sprawling sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. Then utter pandemonium violently erupted. 1,000 wealthy donors, conservative politicians, and elite congregation members simultaneously exploded into a deafening chorus of outraged gasps and furious shouting. The polished, elegant veneer of the 25th anniversary gala completely shattered in an instant. Bishop Marcus lunged forward, desperately clawing at the sleek lapel microphone attached to my gown. His face was a mask of pure feral terror, his eyes wild and unfocused. I did not even flinch. My two massive Aegis defense operatives immediately stepped between us, forming an impenetrable wall of solid muscle and black Kevlar. They shoved the bishop back with enough force to send him stumbling into the heavy acrylic podium. He grabbed the useless dead microphone from the stand, shouting frantically into it, but Elias had completely severed the stage audio feed. Marcus was screaming into a total void, his voice entirely drowned out by the rising chaotic roar of the furious crowd. Down in the front row, Vivian was shrieking, clutching her diamond necklace as if the jewels themselves were suddenly on fire. Arthur Sterling stood calmly beside his banking executives, watching the destruction of the Marcus Empire with cold, calculated satisfaction. He knew exactly what I was about to unleash. I reached into the hidden pocket of my crimson silk gown and pulled out a small, sleek, matte black remote. I held it up, ensuring my father and Brad had a clear, unobstructed view of the device. Brad's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He took a step toward the stage, his hands raised as if he could physically stop the digital avalanche I was about to trigger. I pressed the single center button. Behind the main stage, the massive floor-to-ceiling LED projector screens, usually reserved for displaying joyful hymns and aggressive donation goals, flickered violently to life. In the enclosed audio-visual booth suspended above the ballroom, the church technicians were frantically pounding on their keyboards, desperately trying to regain control of the system. It was completely useless. Elias had bypassed their primitive firewalls hours ago, entirely locking them out of their own mainframe. I had absolute, undisputed control of the visual narrative. The colossal screens illuminated the dark ballroom with blinding white light, displaying a meticulously organized timeline of massive corporate fraud. The first slide showcased the offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. I had instructed Elias to highlight the routing numbers and the heavily shielded account ownership details in bright, glaring crimson. The display smoothly transitioned to the next slide, revealing dozens of unredacted wire transfer receipts. A collective furious gasp ripped through the audience of wealthy donors and devoted church members. Right there, magnified to 20 feet tall, was Bishop Marcus' undeniable digital signature, explicitly authorizing the transfer of millions of dollars from the Holy Renovation Fund directly into untraceable shell companies. The congregation was watching the undeniable proof that their hard-earned tithes, their faithful, generous donations, had been ruthlessly siphoned away by the very man demanding their unwavering loyalty. But I was not finished. The financial documents were enough to send my father to federal prison, but I wanted to absolutely decimate Brad Blackwood. I wanted to publicly strip away his arrogant savior persona and expose the vile parasitic fraud hiding underneath his expensive designer suits. I clicked the remote again. The dry clinical financial documents vanished from the massive screens, replaced instantly by a series of crystal-clear, high-resolution photographs. The images were utterly devastating. The first photo showed a sprawling multi-million-dollar luxury estate nestled in the exclusive hills of Connecticut. The next photo displayed a beautiful blonde woman wearing designer tennis gear stepping out of a brand-new customized Range Rover. But the final photo was the ultimate lethal blow. It showed Brad wearing casual weekend clothes, smiling warmly as he played on a manicured green lawn with 3 blonde children. Alongside the photograph, Elias had projected the corresponding bank statements, directly linking the church renovation fund to the Connecticut mortgage payments, the luxury vehicle lease, and the blonde woman platinum credit cards. The grand ballroom descended into pure, explosive anarchy. The elite deacons, who had fiercely protected Brad, were now shouting in red-faced fury, realizing they had been played for absolute fools. The wealthy donors were demanding their money back, screaming threats of massive class action lawsuits. I looked down at Chloe. My sister was standing near the front row, completely paralyzed. She had known about the financial embezzlement. She had been willing to cover up the corporate fraud to protect her comfortable lifestyle, but she had no idea about the secret family. She stared up at the massive glowing image of her husband holding another woman's children. The heavy designer makeup could not hide the absolute sheer devastation shattering her face. Her knees buckled and she collapsed into an empty banquet chair, covering her mouth as raw, agonizing sobs tore through her chest. The ultimate betrayal had finally broken the golden child. Up on the stage, Brad realized his entire manufactured existence was permanently obliterated. The smug, elite investor persona vanished entirely, replaced by the frantic survival instinct of a cornered criminal. He was facing decades in a federal penitentiary and the violent wrath of the powerful people he had scammed. He completely snapped. He did not look back at his sobbing wife. He did not look at his ruined father-in-law. Brad spun around and bolted. He blindly sprinted away from the stage, shoving his way through the furious, chaotic crowd. A young catering waiter carrying a heavy silver tray of champagne flutes stepped into his path. Brad violently shoved the young man aside, sending the heavy tray crashing to the marble floor. Crystal glass shattered explosively, sparkling under the dim ambient lighting as Brad slipped and scrambled over the wet marble. He locked his desperate, wild eyes on the glowing red emergency exit sign, illuminating the heavy double doors at the back of the grand ballroom. He believed he could slip out into the cool night air, reach his waiting sports car, and vanish into the shadows before the authorities arrived. He hit the heavy steel push bar with his entire body weight, throwing the heavy fire doors wide open and lunging forward into the service corridor. He froze, completely paralyzed in his tracks. The service hallway was absolutely flooded with the harsh, spinning glare of red and blue strobe lights bleeding in through the loading dock windows. Standing shoulder to shoulder, entirely blocking his only path to freedom, was a solid, impenetrable wall of federal law enforcement. A dozen heavily armed FBI agents, wearing dark tactical windbreakers, stood in the corridor. Their federal badges gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and their weapons were already drawn and aimed directly at his chest. A dozen heavily armed FBI agents, wearing dark tactical windbreakers, stood in the corridor. Their federal badges gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and their weapons were already drawn and aimed directly at his chest. Brad did not even have the chance to formulate a coherent thought before two massive agents tackled him against the cold concrete wall. The sickening crack of his jaw hitting the cinder block echoed down the corridor, followed instantly by the sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists. Special Agent Vance stepped forward from the line of armed authorities, lowering his weapon with an expression of absolute disgust. He recited Brad his Miranda rights in a bored, clinical tone, while his tactical team pushed past the struggling con artist and breached the grand ballroom doors to secure the perimeter. Inside the cavernous venue, the sheer magnitude of the betrayal was finally sinking into the minds of the city's most elite figures. The initial stunned silence had rapidly mutated into pure explosive outrage. The massive projection screens continued to cycle through the damning financial documents, illuminating the furious faces of the crowd in harsh white light. Wealthy donors who had happily written six-figure checks for the Holy Renovation Fund were now hurling their crystal champagne flutes at the stage. The delicate glass shattered against the polished acrylic podium. Deacons in expensive suits were shouting over each other, frantically dialing their legal counsel and demanding immediate answers. The pristine 25th anniversary gala had devolved into a volatile, unmanageable riot. Up on the main stage, the holy facade of the Marcus family was violently detonating in real time. Vivian Marcus did not care about the stolen congregation money or the deeply betrayed followers. She only cared about her immaculate social standing, the exclusive country club memberships, and the generational prestige I had just publicly incinerated. She turned toward my father, her eyes blazing with an entirely unhinged feral fury. The carefully crafted mask of the devoted, supportive pastor wife melted away completely. Her manicured hands curled into tight fists and she lunged at him with shocking speed. She began violently striking his chest over and over, her heavy diamond rings tearing at his custom velvet dinner jacket. "You pathetic, weak old fool!" she screamed, her voice shrill and carrying effortlessly over the chaos of the ballroom. "You let a cheap, manipulating grifter destroy us. You let him make us a laughingstock in front of the entire city. Look at them. They are laughing at us, Marcus. You gave away our empire to a street hustler." My father tried to grab her flailing wrists, desperately trying to maintain some illusion of control, but he was entirely paralyzed by shock. The great Bishop Marcus, a man who commanded arenas of weeping worshippers, simply stood there absorbing the physical and verbal blows of a woman realizing her absolute queen status was permanently revoked. He looked utterly hollowed out, his booming voice entirely vanished. Just below them on the main floor, my sister was completely unraveling. Chloe slipped from her elegant banquet chair and fell heavily onto the polished marble floor. Her breathtaking designer gown pooled around her shaking legs as she dropped completely to her knees. For her entire life, she had fiercely believed she was the superior golden child, the unquestioned favorite who did everything perfectly. She had married the wealthy, handsome investment genius. She had lived in the flawless Connecticut mansion. She had smugly looked down on me as the erratic, unpredictable failure. Now she was staring up at high-resolution photographs of her husband's secret blonde family, funded entirely by stolen church tithes. Every single ounce of her manufactured superiority vanished, leaving only a hollow, agonizing void. She realized with crushing clarity that she was never a partner in a powerful elite couple. She was just a convenient, naive pawn utilized by a ruthless con artist to gain unfettered access to her father's bank accounts. Her entire marriage, her status, and her rigid identity were built on a deeply humiliating lie. She sobbed hysterically, clutching her stomach, as the reality of her shattered existence suffocated her. Black mascara ran down her cheeks, completely ruining her flawless makeup as she gasped for air. She looked up and locked eyes with me, standing tall and untouchable, surrounded by my private security, but she could not hold my gaze. She buried her face in her hands, utterly broken. I watched the magnificent destruction from my secure position, flanked by my Aegis operatives. The federal authorities were moving quickly through the ballroom, securing every exit and ordering the frantic crowd to remain calm. Arthur Sterling and the bank executives watched the raid with grim satisfaction, knowing their capital was finally protected by my ruthless intervention. Then the heavy emergency doors near the back of the room banged open again, commanding the attention of the entire room. Special Agent Vance and two towering tactical operatives dragged a violently struggling Brad Blackwood back into the main ballroom. His pristine midnight blue tuxedo was ripped at the shoulder, and bright red blood trickled from a fresh cut on his jaw where he had hit the concrete. Seeing the federal agents swarm the stage, the angry crowd suddenly parted, falling into a tense, electrified silence. The grand ballroom watched as the architect of their financial ruin was paraded before them in heavy steel restraints. Brad realized instantly that he was going to take the entire fall for the offshore accounts. The federal government was going to bury him under a mountain of wire fraud charges, and he would spend the rest of his life in a maximum security cell. He thrashed against the agents, gripping his arms, fighting like a trapped animal, and locked his wild, desperate eyes directly on my father standing frozen on the stage. As the agents dragged him forward in handcuffs, he refused to sink alone. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice tearing through the quiet ballroom. I did not act alone. Marcus authorized everything. He wanted a cut. The echoing accusation hung in the stale air of the grand ballroom like a live grenade. The furious, chaotic energy of the crowd instantly evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, stunned silence. 1,000 pairs of eyes slowly turned away from the bleeding, handcuffed con artist and locked directly onto the man standing frozen on the main stage. Bishop Marcus, the undisputed spiritual king of the city, the man who had demanded their absolute obedience and their hard-earned money, suddenly looked incredibly small. Special Agent Vance did not miss a beat. He gave a sharp, definitive nod to his secondary tactical unit. Two federal agents separated from the wall of law enforcement and walked with terrifying purpose down the center aisle. Their heavy boots thudded against the polished marble floor, a steady rhythmic drumbeat, signaling the absolute end of an empire. They climbed the short steps to the platform, moving with cold, mechanical precision. Marcus snapped out of his paralyzed shock as the agents closed in. He automatically raised his hands, palms facing outward, desperately trying to summon his booming theatrical authority. He tried to project the image of a persecuted saint. "Gentlemen, please!" he stammered, his voice trembling violently, completely stripped of its usual commanding bass. "There is a terrible misunderstanding here. I am a man of God. I have dedicated my entire life to serving this community. That man is a liar trying to save his own skin. You have no right to do this in my church." The federal agents did not care about his pastoral standing. They did not care about his custom-tailored velvet jacket or his expensive gold watch. One agent grabbed the bishop by the shoulder, spinning him around with brutal efficiency, while the other yanked his arms forcefully behind his back. The sharp, heavy click of steel handcuffs locking around my father's wrists echoed through the cavernous, silent room. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the congregation. Wealthy donors covered their mouths in sheer disbelief. Elite deacons who had fiercely protected the Marcus brand for decades physically turned their backs on the stage, refusing to even look at the disgraced leader. They were watching their untouchable spiritual giant being subjected to the ultimate public indignity, paraded before his own flock like a common street thief. Down on the main floor, the reality of the situation violently crashed down on Vivian. She watched the federal agents pat down her husband, reading him his rights in front of the city's most powerful figures. Her entire universe was collapsing in real time. The church was completely ruined. The offshore bank accounts would be frozen by the government within the hour. The country club memberships, the luxury vehicles, the designer wardrobes, everything she had ruthlessly prioritized over her own flesh and blood was gone. She was staring at absolute total destitution and a guaranteed federal indictment. Vivian possessed a terrifyingly primal survival instinct. She looked at her husband being led away in disgrace. She looked at her golden child Chloe still sobbing uselessly on the floor, incapable of processing the destruction of her fake life. Then Vivian's predatory gaze snapped directly to me. I stood perfectly still near the VIP tables, entirely untouched by the devastation. I was flanked by two towering Aegis defense operatives and surrounded by the most powerful banking executives in the state. I was the stealth billionaire. I was the sovereign owner of the commercial debt. I held the unlimited capital she desperately needed to survive. Vivian completely abandoned her carefully cultivated regal elegance. She broke away from the front row and scrambled across the marble floor. Her expensive high heels slipped on the polished surface, so she violently kicked them off, leaving them discarded in the aisle. She literally crawled the last few feet, closing the distance between us with a frantic feral desperation. She dropped heavily to her knees right in front of me, entirely ignoring the shocked stares of Arthur Sterling and the banking elite. She reached out with trembling hands and tightly grabbed the hem of my crimson silk gown. Her flawless designer makeup was completely ruined. Dark mascara streaked down her cheeks, and her perfectly styled hair clung to her face in a sweaty, tangled mess. All her arrogant superiority was gone, leaving only a pathetic, weeping shell. "Maya, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with sheer hysteria. "You have to help us. You have the money, you have the connections, you have to pay the bail. Call Arthur Sterling and get his corporate lawyers right now. You cannot let them take your father away to federal prison. They will destroy him. They will take everything we have. We are your family, Maya. You have to save us." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her demands was staggering. After 32 years of treating me like a worthless disappointment, after actively helping Brad steal my assets, after physically trying to shove me out of family photos, she was now kneeling in the dirt, begging for my wealth. The banking executives watched her pathetic display with open disgust. My lead Aegis operative immediately stepped forward, reaching down to forcibly detach her from my gown. I raised a single hand, calmly signaling the operative to stand down. I looked down at the woman gripping my dress. I looked at the tears streaming down her face and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, no vindication. Just a cold, pristine clarity. This woman had spent my entire existence tearing me down, ensuring I felt completely unlovable, while she worshipped the very people who were secretly destroying her. I reached down with slow, deliberate precision. I wrapped my fingers gently but firmly around her manicured wrists. With one smooth, effortless motion, I pried her desperate, grasping hands entirely off the crimson silk of my gown. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with total panic, realizing her absolute final lifeline was rejecting her. I leaned in slightly, closing the distance between us. My voice was crystal clear, carrying no malice and no hesitation. "I only bail out family," I whispered directly into her tear-stained face. "You made it clear I was not yours." I turned my back on her agonized wailing. I did not look at my father being escorted out the emergency exit by the FBI. I did not look at Chloe weeping over her shattered fake marriage. Flanked by my protective security detail and the most powerful financial titans in the city, I walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving the smoking ruins of the Marcus Empire behind me forever. 6 months later, the thick, suffocating dust of the 25th anniversary gala had finally settled over the city. The catastrophic implosion of the Marcus Empire was no longer breaking news, but an established historical fact taught in corporate law seminars. The justice system moved with terrifying speed when billionaire banking executives demanded immediate retribution. Brad Blackwood completely folded under the crushing weight of the federal indictment. Desperate to save himself from a life sentence, he enthusiastically turned state evidence against his father-in-law, detailing every single fraudulent wire transfer and hidden offshore account. His frantic, cowardly cooperation earned him a mandatory 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The arrogant, polished investment guru who once sneered at my career was now reduced to a mere inmate number, trading his custom-tailored Italian suits for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. Bishop Marcus fared even worse. Stripped of his divine authority and universally abandoned by his wealthy congregation, my father faced the absolute full wrath of the prosecution. The man who had spent 3 decades demanding blind obedience from thousands of devoted followers now sat in a sterile concrete cell, completely stripped of his voice, his power, and his stolen wealth. He was denied bail and awaited a highly publicized trial that would undoubtedly ensure he spent his final years breathing recycled prison air. The Holy Renovation Fund he had so greedily plundered was entirely seized and redistributed back to the victims he had ruthlessly scammed. The financial decimation of my family was a masterpiece of legal precision. The moment the FBI froze the church accounts, Vivian and Chloe realized their entire lavish existence was a fragile, temporary mirage. As the sovereign owner of the commercial debt holding their properties together, my Stealth LLC moved with ruthless efficiency. We immediately initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings on the sprawling multi-million-dollar French-style estate in Connecticut. The manicured lawns, the massive cascading crystal chandeliers, the imported marble floors, everything was swiftly liquidated at public auction. I personally signed the final corporate authorization to sell the property to a rival commercial developer at a fraction of its original vanity price. Stripped of their stolen assets and completely ostracized by the elite country club circles they once ruled, Vivian and Chloe were violently shoved into a harsh, unforgiving reality. Without Marcus or Brad to fund their endless delusions of grandeur, they were forced to vacate the premises with only the clothes they could physically carry. Their bank accounts were locked, their platinum credit cards were declined, and their wealthy friends refused to return their desperate phone calls. They had to relocate to the only place they could afford with their non-existent income. It was a cramped run-down 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying brutalist building on the far edge of the city limits. The walls were paper-thin, the paint was peeling, and the hallway constantly reeked of cheap cooking oil and damp carpet. It was exactly the type of impoverished ghetto neighborhood Vivian used to openly mock from the tinted, secure windows of her chauffeured town car. Vivian, who once spent her afternoons browsing exclusive designer boutiques and sipping vintage champagne with the mayor wife, was now clipping grocery coupons and riding the public bus. Now she was trapped inside it, forced to listen to the loud, aggressive arguments of her neighbors while trying to maintain some pathetic scrap of her former dignity. I sat at my massive mahogany desk, letting the quiet hum of my corporate sanctuary wash over me. My private office occupied the entire top floor of the Sterling Financial Tower, an impenetrable fortress of glass and steel, guarded round the clock by my elite Aegis defense team. The floors were polished black marble, reflecting the ambient lighting like a dark mirror. On the polished digital console of my desk, a single red notification blinked steadily. A new voicemail had bypassed the standard corporate filters. I pressed the speaker icon. "Maya, please do not hang up." Chloe's voice filled the pristine office. She sounded completely unrecognizable. The arrogant sneer, the condescending tone, the absolute certainty of her golden child status were entirely eradicated. She was sobbing heavily, her breath catching in her throat with sheer desperate panic. "Maya, I have nothing left. Brad took everything, and the government lawyers drained my personal accounts. Mom is losing her mind in this awful apartment, and I cannot find a job anywhere. No one will hire me with our last name. I know I was awful to you. I know I stood by and let them treat you like dirt. I was just so stupid and blind. I see it now, Maya. I see how they used me. Please, you are my only family left. You own half the commercial real estate in this city. You could give me a job at your firm, an entry-level position, anything. I am begging you. Let me prove I can be a real sister to you now that they are gone. Give me one more chance." I listened to her ragged, pathetic weeping for exactly 4 seconds. My expression remained entirely neutral. I reached forward and pressed the delete button, violently cutting her off mid-sentence. The digital audio file vanished into the trash bin, permanently erased from existence. I did not feel a single ounce of remorse or guilt. I stood up from my desk and slowly walked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The late afternoon sun was casting a brilliant golden glow over the sprawling city skyline. I looked down at the towering skyscrapers, the bustling commercial districts, and the endless flow of traffic moving like tiny synchronized ants far below my elevated domain. Every major building in the downtown corridor held a mortgage currently managed by my private equity firm. I practically owned the entire view. The stealth empire I had built in absolute silence now stood as the undisputed dominant force in the financial sector. I was no longer the discarded scapegoat. I was the architect of my own sovereign destiny. The heavy oak door of my office clicked open, and my executive assistant stepped inside, carrying a sleek leather tablet. "Miss Maya," she said, her tone perfectly professional and respectful. "I am finalizing your personal schedule for next week. Thanksgiving is approaching quickly. Do you want me to send a holiday grocery basket or a formal dinner invite to your mother and sister at their new address?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, relishing the rich, bitter taste. I kept my gaze locked securely on the spectacular, glowing skyline spreading out beneath my feet. A perfect, serene smile touched the corners of my lips. "No," I replied, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "They already chose the better daughter. Let her handle it. Fade to black." True security and self-worth do not come from the conditional approval of toxic family members. The journey teaches us that when those who are supposed to love you choose to exploit and diminish you, walking away is not a failure, it is a triumph. By building her own empire and exposing their deceit, she proved that financial independence is the ultimate weapon against manipulation. You are never obligated to rescue the people who actively tried to destroy you. Always choose your own peace over their demands. Have you ever cut ties with toxic relatives? Share your story below today